Throughout history and prehistory, all over the world, there have been legends and myths of human interaction with highly intelligent, non-human persons, most of which are not necessarily connected with outer space. In fact, that notion is rare up until our current age. The Hopi said that the ant people came from the caves to teach them. The Aboriginal Australians maintained that the Wangina created them, and Ezekiel encountered hyper-intelligent beings as well. Some of these occurrences were seen in a positive light, and others were downright horrific, indicating multiple intentions of multiple different species. But these old stories elude us, as we were not there, and we cannot speak with anyone who was there. But lucky for us, these exact kind of occurrences happen still frequently to this day, and those who have lived through, experienced, been inspired by, and or traumatized by, and in many cases have survived, sometimes, and I repeat, sometimes, come forward. Reluctantly, the similarities between yesteryear's occurrences and those of today are not only striking, but tend to raise more questions than answers. And just like the legends of old, these modern stories, now deemed paranormal as opposed to myth, do not skip a beat when it comes to being weird as all f***. So I want to get into the Brazilian incident. I can't tell you that one without telling you this one first. And it's important to note that covering up strange happenings was a lot easier back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s before the internet than it is now. So let's keep that in mind throughout this video as we delve into these stories. So Flatwoods, West Virginia, 25 miles from Point Pleasant. A couple dudes named Edward, Freddie, and Tommy saw a bright flash in the sky. And to their surprise, they also witnessed this thing land on some farmland. And whenever they saw this thing hit the ground, they didn't necessarily investigate. They ran home to go get more people. I mean, this is the beginning of a Stephen King film, if you ask me. The group that they assembled was a woman named Kathleen, two other local youths, and a National Guardsman named Eugene Lemon. And all of them went back to the site where the boys saw this fucking thing. Arriving at the site, they saw a pulsing red light. Upon witnessing this, Sergeant Lemon decided to shine his flashlight in that direction, and to the astonishment of everyone within the group, encountered the completely unexpected. Much to the surprise of these spectators, they came into contact with what was described as a man, also described as by some of the spectators as a demon. This so-called man was a creature with a red face and a pointed hood. Insert joke about pointed hood and get demonetized. This thing had orange eyes and was not necessarily on the ground. It was reported to have angled arms and hands and gave off some kind of vapor from its face. And just as quickly as this group put eyes on this thing, it turned to them and began gliding in their direction. And as it did, it created what was described as a machine or mechanical-like squeal. This, of course, caused shock, so much so that Sergeant Lemon, this military man, was startled enough to drop his flashlight, which caused the entire group to just fucking run away. Upon returning to the town, the entire group became nauseated by what they assumed was from this sort of pungent mist, as they described it. What's fun to note is that newspapers later, as this story caught fire, reported that these spectators had contracted radiation poisoning. This is actually completely not true. And speaking of which, these spectators reported this being as being about 7 to 8 feet tall, and the newspapers likewise reported it as being 11 to 12 feet tall. Thus, continuing to prove that no matter how astonishing a story is, the news will find a way to lie about it.
Authorities responding to this incident the next day went to the location and reported finding nothing of any significance. However, locals and citizens of Flatwoods, as you might imagine, became curious and went there themselves. Some of the locals found things at the site such as ruts in the ground and a strange gummy deposit. And this has caused people to speculate that of a UFO, but let's keep it reeled in for now. This story caught the news. It became national headlines, of course, and these people were actually not the only witnesses of this strange creature or the craft in which it is assumed it had come from. But it is only fair to detail what the skeptics have to say about this event that happened pre-internet. Skeptics to say that the light in the sky that was witnessed by multiple people across 3 different states, 2 or 3 different states, was a meteor, and that the landing of this meteor was imagined by the boys. The skeptics are also saying that the pulsing light was a hazard beacon for planes. That does make sense, but the problem is if you look at the location in which this event happened, you wouldn't have been able to see any hazard lights nearby. However, there's really no substantial proof of that being so. We have to take their word for it on that. And that brings us to the creature itself. The skeptics are saying that it was a barn owl. You know, the kind of owl that vomits out poisonous vapor. Whenever we hear that description of the claw-like angled hands that this thing had, it does seem reminiscent of a barn owl. But each of these spectators also reported upon the garment in which this creature wore, which was a mechanical, machine-like, almost dress, so to speak, in which case the skeptics argue that that was foliage. Another kudos I'll give to the skeptics is that as this thing floated and glided in their direction, that also seems a lot like an owl's silent flying. Yo, Nathan, what's up, bro? I'm making a video right now, so you're in it.
Oh.
What's how long are you gonna be up for?
Forever. I just woke up.
I'm gonna be up forever. Right. That's right. In about 30 minutes. Is that cool, man?
Yeah, sure.
All right, man. Talk to you soon.
All right.
You guys gotta check out my buddy Nathan's shit. Look up Black Waltz on YouTube and Sidereal, a black metal band called Sidereal. He's the drummer of Sidereal and the vocalist of Black Waltz. It's badass shit. In fact, I use Sidereal music in these videos all the time. All right, so back to the skeptics. Another strange thing about the owl hypothesis, this creature's face and composure was described as being reptilian by these witnesses and other witnesses. That kind of throws a wrench in the entire bird thing. And I mean, when we look at the drawings made by all of the individuals and then look at the barn owl, I mean, I wonder if I should be looking up for, maybe I'm gonna put the pictures up here. I don't know. Oh, my fucking shit went blue. Hold on. Skeptics continue on that the gummy residue found by the locals must have been oil from a leaky truck. They also claim that to associate this owl with this phantom that later became known as the Flatwoods Phantom. Sergeant Lemon is a National Guardsman. He freaked out too. These aren't just kids and women freaking out and running away. And he reports the same thing as they did. What's very interesting about this is when you go on Wikipedia, they debunk it by saying that description of the creature vary from person to person, and then they leave it at that. Looking into this, I found that the differences in the description of the creature was simply a disagreement of what the arms looked like, and nothing further. This is a perfect example of, with the power of media through newspaper propaganda, you can debunk something very easily because this is, again, pre-internet. the people who saw this thing, all of them, didn't have a way for their voices to actually be heard. They had to be filtered through propagandist media, of which we all know is absolutely absurd on both sides. Either the media stories exaggerated it or they completely debunked it. Nobody actually covered the story. Unlike this next story we get to, in which we have the internet, and the people can come forward and tell their stories and create verifiable and credible witness statements. I'm not dismissing this owl case, just like the Mothman. Sometimes owls are very startling, especially when they're fucking up in a tree or something like that, and they make eye contact with you. It gets fucking scary. I digress, and let's jump into the events, the unbelievable events that occurred in Brazil. Let's go. Very recently in Varginha, Brazil, NORAD reported an aircraft. It came up as unidentified. Utilizing radar, they witnessed this device that seemed to have crashed. Very coincidentally, at the same time as this happening, there was a farming couple in the same location that reported seeing a cylindrical, tic-tac shaped flying device above their farmland, floating silently, as we see a lot nowadays. Not long after, a man named Carlos was driving his truck when he saw the same cylindrical craft, or craft so to speak, in the air billowing some kind of white smoke. And this caught his curiosity. He decided to follow it. This man had the balls to do so and was actually able to find the so-called crash site where this thing, sheer curiosity took over this man, and he approached the site, where he reported to not be able to breathe the air because of this white mist. And he used his shirt to cover his mouth and face and looked around, reporting that despite looking like a crash site, he didn't see any survivors or bodies. And much to his dismay, very quickly afterwards, he was approached by several trucks, military personnel, a swarm of government officials. They kicked his ass off the site, and he went back into town, where he was met with two men who made it clear to him that they knew him and they knew his family. And upon letting him know that, not so politely asked him to shut the fuck up about the entire thing, in which case he did for a long time. As would I. About 3 hours after the supposed crash site, a college student reported seeing an oily creature, like a man, like a humanoid, rummaging from place to place while injured. This startled him incredibly, and he fled with 3 fingers on each hand. Then, not long after that, only a few blocks away, 3 women reported seeing this exact same creature, an oily, fetal, struggling creature with 3 fingers on each hand. These girls found this demon-like creature to be intriguing until, well, it turned and it looked at them. And when something looks at you like this, you can just instinctually know that it's intelligent. Not a creature, but a person. A non-human person. What happened next, though, exceeds anything that we know about intelligence. The being said to them, and I quote, "Help, I am afraid." But when it said this, its lips didn't move and it didn't make a sound. This non-human person could match the thought frequency of the girls and send communication on that channel or frequency from mind to mind. This is known as telepathic communion. So, I mean, this just went from witnesses and sightings to communion, interaction, communication between separate species. And not surprising, despite this creature needing help, sight was so startling that the girls, just like the previous characters within the story, fled. They ran home and they said that they saw a demon. It's important to note that no one reported seeing an alien or a gray. They said what they saw was demonic. Of course, we realize that fear can cause somebody to describe something as demonic despite this thing needing help and possibly being of innocent origin. This description of it being a demon reminds me a lot of this Flatwoods Phantom, which was also described as being a demon, not an alien, by the direct spectators. These girls went to gather some people and go back to the site with their mother, and found in the mud, as this was a bit of a rainy day, was a footprint. This footprint had 3 toes. This matches exactly with what the original man, our college student, described on this being's hands. It's important to keep in mind at this point that these spectators were unrelated and not in cahoots. Everyone in this story so far, and all of the next characters, this keeps going, reported this scent of ammonia, like a chemical smell that lingered in their noses for days, weeks, and in some cases even months afterwards. Keep that in mind as we go on here. And quick side note, this chemical smell reminds me a lot of DMT, but let's keep it reeled in for now. This brings us to the next part of the story where 2 police officers patrolling the area actually also saw this thing sort of rummaging across the road. Despite being startled, unlike our previous witnesses, Officer Marco saw this fucking thing and he jumped out of the patrol car and decided to help this distressed creature. Attempting to do the right thing, Officer Marco wrangled this creature and brought it to the hospital where it died. And that's where the story starts to get a little batshit crazy. This next part is alleged, so let's keep that in mind, but also keep our minds open. Officer Marcos, being the only one to actually handle this creature, became very ill, like those in Flatwoods, and many other cases of contact with hypersentient humanoids. This is a recurring theme. Marcos himself reeked of this chemical smell, which seemed to completely permeate him. This nasty ass shit wouldn't wash off, and Officer Marcos died in intensive care of unknown causes. He was buried immediately after his death as a concern for public safety because of his death being so mysterious, and also because the fact that now, according to autopsy, 8% of his blood was now registering as an unknown substance. And heads up, a lot more people die. It's reported that Marcos might have had a cyst that caused him to die. As if this can't get any more fucked up, this humanoid person had company. After the sickly creature had been witnessed by the previous spectators, many townspeople, saw this other thing running around, healthy and unharmed. And these same spectators also saw military trucks show up, wrangle up what was described to be something struggling and frantically moving inside of a black plastic bag. At this point, it's worth noting that certain things can't be kept a secret. Within this town, there was military fucking everywhere. This could not be ignored by any citizens within the vicinity, which makes a cover-up very difficult, as we will see here momentarily.
Mathematics has proven there to be upward of 11 spatial dimensions, of which our physical biology does not pick up on. We understand that the human eye only picks up a fraction of the entire spectrum of what can be seen. And as another decade goes by of not knowing anything about the origins of dark matter or the activity of dark energy, it is safe to say that a majority of what exists in the universe goes completely undetected to the normal human entity. If there are things beings outside of our 5 or 6 senses to detect, then surely this must also indicate that there is sentient life outside of our senses, as it would be ridiculous for consciousness to be barricaded within the confines of human detectability. Just as a scuba diver goes into the water to interact with fish, who must find him to be strange, or a child that goes into a video game to interact with characters as an avatar, or a scientist adding a germ to a petri dish to test its compatibility with a culture of bacteria, we must assume that the sentient life forms outside of our direct experienced reality must, from time to time, penetrate into our world. And when it does, it becomes the substance of legend and what we call today as strange happenings or the unexplained. So if you missed part 1, first of all, go f*** yourself, but here's a really quick catch up. Varginha, Brazil, NORAD picked up something unidentified and watched it land. Several witnesses saw a cigar-shaped object in the sky. There were reports of a crash site or some kind of wreckage. Multiple witnesses came into contact with a being that needed help and was transported to the hospital where it died. Another being on the loose had to be wrangled up by military personnel, which now swarmed the town. The townspeople saw the military scramble to deliver a black bag to the nearest hospital, where the doctor on site was asked to do the unexpected. This is not science fiction, and here's the rest of the story, followed by speculation on what these and other beings might be and their origins and intentions.
This next part, the doctor, who was also threatened to silence, has recently come forward to describe the events that I don't think any sci-fi or horror writer could have come up with. The hospital on lockdown was filled wall to wall with military personnel. Everyone in attendance, all the staff and nurses and doctors, were afraid to speak. It was a vibe. The military insisted that the doctor take x-rays of this black bag. The doctor took the x-rays as ordered by the military, but the military insisted on pulling the x-ray prints themselves and quickly rushed the entire convoy away as quickly as they appeared. So this doctor himself not only never saw the creature or what was inside the bag, but he actually never got to see the x-rays in which he took. And he complains to this day that he did not get a chance to verify whether the x-rays were done well or not, because sometimes x-rays don't come out clear. The military did not seem to give a shit about that. Their priority was more based on the doctor not seeing his own x-rays than they were for those x-rays to be of quality. Also worth noting is that a local firefighter who actually helped wrangle up this second creature into the black bag with the military, also sworn secrecy, he also died about 3 days later of the same ailment as Officer Carlos. Anything that can be debunked, I would like to at least give the benefit of the doubt. This particular part of the story about the firefighter is alleged and comes from word of mouth accounts. So that's not something we can bet all of our marbles on. The doctors, nurses, and staff were all told that this was a training exercise. They were forced to sign papers that threatened jail time and fines if these events were spoken of. But I mean, we all know how that goes when a strange happening is experienced by dozens and dozens of people. They talk amongst each other, and then they talk amongst friends and family, and then it catches fire, and people do what is right, and they come forward. And as people come forward, more people come forward. Unfortunately, those who were directly there who have come forward versus those who came forward after the story caught fire causes a bit of confusion and, I should say, debauched debunkery along the way. For example, the best way that this story has been debunked by particular sources of information is the fact that some of these later accounts of people coming forward who say they were involved with this were found to be inconsistent in their stories. These accounts will be put on the forefront of these stories by skeptics to debunk them in such a way that, psychologically speaking, If you get into a story and you find out one thing is false about it, it causes your brain, your mind, your ability to see the whole picture to associate the entire thing with being false. This is kind of the same as this has done with this flat earth conspiracy. You know, they realized that real conspiracies were becoming to the forefront of us through the internet, and we're starting to catch on to their bullshit, and therefore they put out a wildly crazy theory such as flat earth, let it catch fire. That way normal people associate all conspiracy theories with ridiculous ones like flat earth. But before I go and call any conspiracy theories ridiculous, I might as well admit that here in a moment, I'm getting ready to go into a short spout of reptilians. But, interesting note, some of the military men involved in this also came forward, same as this doctor and most of the townspeople who saw this thing. And he also remembers vividly seeing this creature with the bag open and reported being stricken by this notion of it having 3 appendages on each limb, 3 fingers, 3 toes. And another part of the story is it continues, and I can't make this shit up. This next part is fun. When the excuse-riddled cover-up the military gave about it being a training exercise began unraveling due to public curiosity, the military changed their story to this. Some of you are laughing right now if you're familiar with this story. They changed their story from it being a training exercise to assisting dwarves have a baby. The military claimed that there was 2 little people, a couple, having a baby, and they needed military assistance in order to deliver this new baby. And that's what the whole lockdown was about, and that's what the creature was in the bag, was a couple of dwarves having babies. If you guys can help me with figuring that, I don't know. Also, on the same notion of so-called debunking, it's worth noting that the hospital was getting new equipment that day. The military claims to have been responsible for delivering that equipment. What a lot of skeptics are saying that these 3 girls and people saw that day was a mentally challenged man, a local man who is skinny and kind of feral. You can look at pictures of him, I'll put it right here. This man was known to the townspeople, you know, a bit of a stray cat, I suppose you might say. Those involved with debunking the story claimed that because it was raining that day, the people of the town were confusing him for this demon. I'll be the first, maybe the first to say it, but that's fucking rude to go and say, no, you guys didn't see a demon or an alien or anything like that. It was a guy. It's how dehumanizing that must be to this poor man. But that's none of my business, I guess. Journalist named I didn't put that in my notes. Put his name on the screen. He went down there to kind of get the story and in a way kind of debunk it. That was his kind of thing. And he went to go speak with the witnesses, including the doctor and the guy who drove this being around. And he was saying that in all the years of his investigative journaling, he has seen all the bullshit, lies, and people of truth. And he can tell the difference between the attitude of those seeking attention and profit and those who are, frankly, frightened and confused. And he insisted that everyone he spoke with who was directly tied to these original events were undeniably still shaken years later, especially the doctor, who seemed to be beyond genuine, of real humility and fear about all of these events. Some of the witnesses were offered money for their story after they had already come forward. The news offered them a paycheck and they took the money. And this debunks it. let me tell you, if that's what I would do. And that's what you would do. And that's what these skeptics saying that this debunks it, that's what they would do. They would take the money as well. You're going to take the money. I don't see that as a viable way of debunking anything. People need money. The world runs on it, as we learned in our last video. It's worth noting that whenever they want to debunk these things, they put these inconsistent parts of the story that surface later in first as the leading edge of the story to sway the public, but the public buys it, but we don't. What's up, little buddy?
Are you in a video right now?
I am. You have food on your shirt. It's an egg. Was that a good sandwich this morning?
Yeah, except the bread I didn't eat.
No, you didn't like the bread?
Yeah, look. This is the reason I want to get that bald python.
Okay. You want another ball python? Oh, wait. We have a boa constrictor, don't we?
Yeah. You can breed them, though.
You can breed them.
And then look.
What's the name of the YouTube lady who takes care of reptiles? I want to give her a shout out. My boy is 11 years old today, guys. So
Actually, it was yesterday.
So give Emery a happy birthday.
Reptile. Big discovery.
We need to get you a YouTube Premium. Get rid of these ads.
Shout out to Snake Discovery.
Snake Discovery, your YouTube channel is absolutely fascinating, informative of our reptiles. Thank you very much. We appreciate you. Do you need to charge your phone?
Yeah, that's fine.
You have 15% and we're leaving to the Mystic Fair.
I'm not bringing it there.
All right.
What are you talking about?
Well, you are directly in front of my notes, so do you want to pull up a chair or just scoot to the side? Any opinions on Mothman?
I'm pretty sure he can fly,
Yeah,
and he's a super villain.
He's a super villain, dude. What
And
about
Spider-Man kills him with a single web.
how about reptilians?
They would beat Spider-Man with one bite. What is Tom Holland the newest Spider-Man?
As far as I know, Tom Holland is the only Spider-Man. Uncharted, when he was jumping from car to car as they jumped and as they fell out of the plane and they found the treasure, and then that.
Yeah, he's the best Spider-Man.
He's the best Spider-Man. I know.
You said that Spider-Man would defeat him.
No, he would defeat the reptile.
Yeah, he does in the movie.
Hell yeah, he does. Do you have any opinions on the Greys? What do you think they are?
What the heck is a bird?
The Greys.
It's a lizard.
So you're saying that this looks like an alien, but this looks like a lizard?
Yes.
So what does that tell us? Think about that for a moment psychologically. How close these beings seem to be that my son, who is unbiased about any of this shit, sees this and says alien, and sees this and says reptile. Almost makes you wonder if there's maybe some kind of, if I talk like this, does it look like you're talking? Anyways, so reptilian creatures seem to feast upon our suffering. Astral beings that can shapeshift into our reality, therefore infiltrating and blah, 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 blah. I'm turning it into David Icke real quick. This one. I'm not going to cover the Mothman because...
I think the Mothman would...
Whoa. Am I recording still?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure.
So I don't know what the cat did to my original tracks here. She walked on this sample pad and hit a button, which I'm not familiar with, so that cat's smarter than I am when it comes to get my own shit up. Anywho, you already know the Mothman story, so I would like to tell you what a lot of people might not realize is that the occurrence of the Mothman is not isolated to Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Whenever the sightings stopped after the bridge collapse in Point Pleasant, he was seen in Chicago, over 100 sightings near Lake Michigan on his, I guess, seemingly on his way to Chicago, multiple sightings that seem to draw a line of travel. After several sightings of the Mothman in this one of these separate regions, the St. Anthony Bridge collapsed just like the bridge in Point Pleasant did. I mean, coincidence? Sure, but one hell of a coincidence. I suppose you can't have a video on hypersentient cryptoids without mentioning the reptilians, which has, I guess, reoccurred. Some people claim that they are the original inhabitants of Earth and that we, mammals, are new to the Earth. And it's hypothesized that during this gap of missing time, there was an intelligent species of reptiles that inhabited Earth, was forced to go underground. And this is what legend says as well. Not only is it said by military personnel who have come forward, but many legends and myths of ancient times describe these reptilian creatures that went underground due to the Younger Dryas era and built cities. These cities sometimes are called Agartha, Shambhala, and have different names throughout different cultures, but what is absolutely verifiable is that there are deep underground cities, not caverns, not holes in the ground, not caves. Man-made cities that housed thousands of people. How did they see in these underground cities they built? Many of which don't have suits on the ceiling of the tunnels, so they weren't using torches. Have to have the vision of a, Other accounts of reptilians claim that a species that lives outside of our dimensional awareness, outside of our biological abilities to sense them. We all know that our five senses are very limited compared to the spectrum of reality that can be picked up. And it is said that these creatures live within a dimension of space in which we can't see. Tales of impossibility, which helps bring to light something very interesting, that mathematics has proven that there are 11 spatial dimensions. We are aware of 3 spatial dimensions. How'd you do that anyway? How'd you get that petrified?
We used salt.
Salt. Okay, so pink salt. We ate the crawdaddy.
Don't say that anymore. You should actually cut that out.
Why?
He said daddy.
Crawdaddy?
He said daddy, yeah.
Okay, what's wrong with that?
2023.
2023? Why can't I say crawdaddy?
Daddy now. It's like a sugar daddy. Now. So like, you shouldn't say that in 2023.
Okay, I won't say crawdaddy, but I will say
23.
I will say that Tom Holland's name is actually being pronounced wrong whenever it should be pronounced daddy. What do you think? Crawdad said that wasn't the crawdad speaking, that was
Yeah, it is.
If you become a ventriloquist, I'm gonna be pissed.
I don't even know what that is.
Do you think that sentient creatures can exist outside of our awareness, outside of our 5 senses?
We have more than 5 senses.
How many senses do we have?
36.
36 senses?
Yeah.
In the West, we say that we have 5 senses. In the East, though, they say we have 6 senses because they consider mind to be a sense.
Well, yeah, it is 6.
I think so, too.
And also, there's different parts of the mind, so those are different senses in the mind.
True. In which case, it's worth noting that maybe a separate sense happens whenever we feel things within. That's fine. Speaking of these spatial dimensions that we can't see but can prove mathematically, expanding upon this idea of, just use scissors, there being multiple or in any case, in infinite dimensions in which our human biology can't pick up on. Expounding upon that is a great book, The Holographic Universe. This is one of the first books to actually dive into the subject, and it's a must-have for anybody's esoteric library. What's interesting about the combination of us factually knowing that there's 11 spatial dimensions are living within a reality that is not able to be understood by us in our biological form. That's new science. What is old science though? Old science though is guys like King Solomon, demons or daemons to your left, there are tens of thousands to your right, and alluded to the idea that we are in reality completely surrounded by sentient beings all of the time, but sentience permeates our reality. Within this reality is beings that we just can't see any more than an ant can see us. If you blow on the ant, It senses that as wind. It's not going to think to itself, a person just blew me. Make your own jokes if you want about that little slip up. But just like those ants, we have to put down our ego for long enough to admit that we might also be of a lower dimensional frequency. We can't perceive a vast array of the universe around us, and that includes sentient life. If I was to hypothesize, the idea that we can see ants, but they can't really see us, so to speak, tells me that these beings, if they are in fact not of flesh and blood origin, but of more of a spiritual origin, so to speak, or maybe are of physical nature, but just live within the compounds of a larger frequency of vibration of reality, we have to admit that it very well could be that we are the ants in this case and they are the people. And then there's the whole rabbit hole about government and reptilian shapeshifters, in which case I've seen zero compelling evidence of this. Now, I could be wrong, but that's just where I'm at right now with that whole thing. My last video, this Gateways of the CIA, delve into Dr. John Monroe's actual 35-year study of these reptilian creatures that occurred to most of the participants in the CIA-funded Gateway process, as well as Dr. John Monroe himself. These occurrences with non-human intelligent beings are not rare. In fact, it is said that upwards of 70% of people who have experience these otherworldly events and creatures don't come forward. 70%, which makes me kind of realize something. What's the difference between the people who don't come forward and the people who do? Dr. John Mack is responsible for an entire field of psychology that is just meant to help anonymous people who have had these strange occurrences and can't describe them.
So, could we make that bomb at one point, maybe?
Yeah, we'll make a bomb. Sure. All right, get out of here. Sentience permeates matter. And in fact, we know that sentience comes before matter. So biological form, the reality that we perceive, is a fractal of conscious sentience. Consciousness, that primordial first cause, fractaled out into infinite possibilities, creating separate dimensions and different kinds of life forms and biological entities that sense the universe and the world around them in different ways. In the same way that a clam cannot see the way that we see with eyes, it does see and take in reality, however, in a completely different way than we do. It's all of a sudden not so weird to think about the fact that modern day science seems to back up the ideals that we are surrounded by sentient beings that sometimes penetrate into our 3D reality. Back in the day, Solomon called them angels and demons, and so did everyone else. Today, we call them aliens or extraterrestrials. In the Middle Ages, they were called fairies. The list goes on, you know. Depending on the era and time and culture, they're called different things, but they're always sort of described the same way. Introduce Dr. Pickles.
Yeah.
Dr. Pickles himself is actually a fourth dimensional creature as well. We're lucky enough to have him here in our reality.
Yeah, and then he muted our stuff.
Audio.
Yeah.
So show him Dr. Pickles is a Zen master. We can prove it because look at this white beard. He's got a super bright white mustache.
Yeah, even though he's like a couple months old.
He's only a couple months old. Very playful. He's got a very loud purr too. But I love the way he looks because he looks like one of them ancient gurus, ancient guru type man.
Yeah.
All right. I think it's time to wrap up this video, Dr. Pickles.
Yeah, that's right.
I think we'll leave it at that. We covered a lot of ground today, and if you guys have any suggestions on other humanoid creatures that need to be covered or details about these stories that have slipped, this is kind of a paranormal type of video. If you guys are more of fans of the esoteric and alchemical subjects that we cover, like the Gnostic thought stuff, let me know what your favorite is because I'm planning on kind of dishing out
We're ending it.
a little bit of both. Yeah, it's at the end.
Alright. This is the end right now?
This is the end. We're done.
Hug, goodbye. Alright, cut the camera.
Alright, it's cut.
But I seem to have been pushed. I fell off the ground. I'll breathe new venom when I get up. So ask me how I became a monster in man's skin now. The hurt spread pain now that they've learned how. Looks like you figured me out. Do your hands create or fight, cheat, steal and take? A turn for the worse can change your ways. I swim through blood, sweat, tears and rain as I endure the suffering. I swear through lies that I once had faith. I think your world is killing me. I seek inner peace, but inside I'm in pieces. Your world takes a hold. I feel a change as deep as my bones go. In my last stand, I'm getting real good at taking the bad. A world of misdeeds shapes who I am. Looks like you're taking me in. I think your world is changing me. We all fall down, but I seem to have been pushed. I fall off the ground. My chains will break before they bend. So ask me how I became a monster in man's skin now. You'll know me best when I push you down. Looks like you figured me out.
When a person blasts off on 55 milligrams of the spirit molecule, they are met with beings who are damn near indescribable. No matter your set and setting or how much planning you did, you'll be flabbergasted by the world that you have just entered. A world completely dimensionally alien to our human biology. You might have had questions planned going into this, but especially if it's your first time, this will go right out the window and you'll end up asking some watered down last resort questions like, what's the meaning of life and who are we as humans? But much to your surprise, you'll find that sometimes the beings will accommodate you with an incredible download into your psyche that answers those very questions precisely and accurately. This is an absolute miracle, but once you come back from that place, those answers are either forgotten, like yesterday's dream, or completely ineffable, which drives us crazy because we can't find the words to tell anybody what we just learned. But what if there was a theory floating around that could answer those very questions in plain English? And what if that theory was hidden in plain sight, just like the truth always turning out to be stranger than fiction? What if this theory is so batshit crazy that even if you are open-minded, you still wouldn't be able to absorb it any more than that trip down McKenna Avenue? When I first read about the story of the Council of Nine, I immediately dismissed it, but decided to dive into it just a bit for the sake of being open-minded, and maybe even for some entertainment and inspiration. Although Dolores Cannon is kind of one-stop shopping for this kind of stuff, I wanted my information from the source. A book called The Cedars by Elena Dan Aan. Elena Dannon was easy to track down, but the real OG book on the subject, entitled The Only Planet of Choice, was damn near impossible for me to find. I searched online for something about it and was lucky to come across a channel by Jade Lore called Compounding Infinity, where she literally reads the book out loud and gives her own commentary on it. While listening to this book, my brain constantly connected to prior things that I have read, including missing gaps in the fossil record and global catastrophes like that of the Younger Dryas era that have only come to the light of modern science very recently. That is, after this rare-ass book was written. I knew that this information was gathered by a technique called channeling, which also caused me to become more skeptical. But when I went back and compared these so-called conversations by channeling to that of the proven greats like Edgar Cayce, I was absolutely astounded by the parallels. How could it be that multiple people who didn't know each other and before the internet could manufacture exactly parallel stories that just so happened to fill in the missing gaps of history, science, and consciousness, and most importantly, the problem with evolution? How could it be that these people answer the question that we mentioned above, why are we here, with exactly the same story, the same names, without skipping a beat? The fact of the matter is that we understand that people like Nikola Tesla and Edgar Cayce could tap into the Akashic Records, or the unified field that we call it today. But for some reason, whenever the story goes from inventions and healing the sick to alien intervention and divine purposes, our belief system completely shuts down. Our society today will look Nikola Tesla right in the face and say thank you for inventing everything we have, but we don't believe you about angels. Our society today will look at Edgar Cayce in the face and say, thank you for healing my sick child and thousands of others, but we don't believe you about Atlantis. This is absolute hubris and ego at its zenith. What we need now more than ever are people with the balls to dive into these rabbit holes with an open mind and an unstagnant belief system without being afraid to be called a fool.
Show yourself. Come down here and take my hand. Stay with me and show me glory.
So there are theories that all myth and religions are alien in origin, but certainly not the way the History Channel puts it. The highly respected head of the Israeli Defense Ministry, Hayam Eshed, retired in 2020 and immediately started spouting off about a Galactic Federation that are waiting for humans to evolve enough to come out and play. He added that human beings have a gigantic misunderstanding about what extraterrestrials are, and in fact, a misunderstanding about what space-time actually is. Needless to say, nobody paid attention. And to be honest with you, neither did I really, considering his age. But I did agree with him that the term aliens that we use today is probably way off kilter, considering that we paint them in the fashion of being people from other planets. And like we've said on this channel before, that is us just talking about us, the same way that medieval people called them fairies and the ancient Australian or Aboriginals called them sky serpents, and etc, etc, etc. So from here on in the video, let's throw out all preconceptions we have about the term extraterrestrial that might have been driven into our psyche by movies and pop culture. And let's drive that point home with a metaphor real quick. In a game called The Sims, you can create a community of people and give them all individual jobs and lives and things to do. And then of course you become busy with your life outside the game and you don't come back to it for a few weeks. When you do return, you find that these characters might be off and running and doing their own thing, things that you didn't necessarily plan on, almost as if they have free will of their own. You can nudge them back in the correct direction and this might work, but the characters that you have created are still not not 100% controllable anymore. While you are trying to nudge these characters back in the right direction, they will experience synchronicities due to that is the player's hand. And they have no idea that you can see them because they sure as fuck cannot see you. This might be a slightly, and I repeat slightly, better way to look at the idea of extraterrestrials and or divine beings. A scientist named Robert D. Pearson conducted research that seems to indicate that the interaction of the cosmos as well as subatomic particles seem to resemble the neural networks of a brain, almost like we are living within a brain, and we are the brain's ideas. This, of course, reminds us of the Hindu idea of the Brahma. Exploring this idea led me to a book called Visitation by Alan Watts. Now, before you jump out of your seat with excitement, expecting to hear the buttery smooth voice that could make a grizzly bear purr coming from the salty smile that makes Ryan Reynolds just look like a garbage pail kid, this book has very little to do with Zen. And this is not the same charismatic styled Alan Watts that we have come to know and love, although the book does have its particular tongue-in-cheek quirks. But the book is very well put together and poignant enough for me to refer to it more than any other book on the subject for this video. When I first cracked the book open randomly, setting eyes on a random page, I read the following. They are beings occupying a space between men and spirits, resembling men and spirits, resembling men and women in their organization and form, and resembling spirits in the rapidity of their locomotion. So, you guessed it, synchronicity strikes, and this book happens to go into depth about the Council of Nine and the 24 civilizations coined as the Galactic Federation. This was enough coincidence for me to decide to go ahead and make this video. So the book kicks off pretty early on about beings visiting humans that are not necessarily flesh and blood persons as we have been trained to think, but instead appear to us as avatars, skins that accord to our own consciousness, the same way that we can go into a video game dressed however the we want and appear however we choose. After all, this is the only way for the NPCs within the video game to possibly be able to comprehend us. Let's remember Robert Pearson's theory while I read this short section that reminds me of our Sims game hypothesis. The ideas predict an intelligent universe which is based on a cosmic grid, which is responsible for the creation of matter. It was while I was working at my computer that I suddenly realized that I had something like a black dog or a man in black before me on the monitor. I was looking at one of the icons which represent the names of discs on the computer screen. I guess we don't really use discs anymore, but you get the idea. That icon was preserved intact and it was moved around. It also represented the ability to summon up from the computer's memory a much more complex program. A program, moreover, that I could clone. Now, before you scream at me, this is purely speculation, but if I wanted to teach humans something from a sidereal point of view, I would appear to them as a respected creature like an ibis or a serpent, as opposed to a human being. I mean, after all, trying to teach people abstract ideas as a human can possibly get your ass crucified or shot in the head. I am not at all denoting symbolism of the ancients, by the way. By all means, go back and watch my videos about symbolism. But I like to play on multiple sides of theories because a specific belief system is only going to make my mind shut down to other possibilities. In either case, I think that we need to start looking in the direction of the subjective worlds beyond the material instead of the objective atoms that create matter. Similar to Nikola Tesla and many others, Edgar Cayce described there to be disembodied entities on various planes of psychic development. He also insisted that any one of us could interact with these creatures as long as we have tuned ourselves to the frequency mentally. He would then enter what he described as a hall of records. And this obviously reminds us of how Nikola Tesla described his interactions with angels. So both of them, being the most notable, are only two of many so-called clairvoyants who insist on pointing us in exactly the same direction. But the one who sticks out to me the most is Phyllis Schlemmer, who, despite being strikingly parallel with these other mediums, is the most precise and detailed when it comes to the origins of humanity. That is through the Council of Nine and the 24 civilizations that we call the Galactic Federation. So let's go. The work of Schlemmer forces us to realize that what happens on Earth has a direct effect on the rest of the universe, and that we are, as opposed to what a nihilist would indicate, very important, and in fact, have a true purpose here. We'll go into that into detail shortly, but here's a quick summary so that we can grasp the nuggets of the rest of this video. So I've drawn this elaborate chart that helps us illustrate the ineffable layout of what we'll be talking about. All right, I'm just kidding. This is what I scribbled in the book. Here is the actual chart that I photoshopped together here. At the top of the chart is a primordial first cause, of which there are so many names that you get to just pick your own. This primordial first cause seems to be the essence of love itself, but cannot necessarily express itself or experience itself without duplication, thus expansion. Second from the top is the 9 forces of the Godhead. They are conscious but completely formless, and in fact completely outside of our abilities of comprehension. Being that they are called the Council of Nine, I can't help but think of the tetrahedron that we are familiar with, the triangle pointing up and the triangle pointing down. However, this only creates 6. Well, that's because this is a 2-dimensional representation. If you were to have a third triangle facing adjacent to you, that would create a total of 9. And it seems as if there is no wonder that this symbol is so prevalent in so many religions. This Council of Nine is the closest that beings can be to Source, considering that Source is not a being, but in fact that in which being can be. And I mean, remember, it's not what the eyes see, but that by which the eyes can see. Know that to be Brahma the Eternal. The third rung down, we have the 24 civilizations. This Galactic Federation works in direct correspondence with the 9 and is responsible for seeding life amongst places of different densities, including high-density worlds such as planets. They are known to create life in their own image. This kind of helps us understand why everything from Greys to Arcturians to Zeta Reticulans and Pleiadians, they all seem to share a common form similar to human beings: a head, torso, and 4 limbs. In the fourth from the top, we have quite a variety of advanced civilizations, some of which are quite helpful and some of which are just selfish assholes, like in the case of the Draco Reptilians, which mythologically speaking has plagued humanity since its beginning. This also seems to be the level in which the Greys reside. The Greys are said to be not necessarily biological in nature, but more of a machine or avatar that is used to come into our reality to do the work of particular other civilizations. Beings that cannot pierce into the realm of physical matter. After all, it is high in density. Kind of the same way that we put on a character for a video game that is obviously not objectively us. And this kind of helps us explain why the Greys have been seen as both good and bad throughout history and mythology. Last but not least, at the bottom, we have high density physical matter. That is the world that we live in, also referred often to as the black cube. Everything within this realm we can see and perceive with no problem because our biology has evolved to navigate it. However, the higher up you get on this chart, the more abstract or unperceivable the conscious sentient formats become. Our brain could not handle the download of truly perceiving the top 2 rows. And even the third row is a total mindfuck. I mean, check the Bible or ask Howard Lovecraft. But this begs an obvious question: why would the bottom of the pyramid be so important to the top of the pyramid? Well, let's take a look at the top of the chart being an Ouroboros. This system, just like everything else in the universe, is meant to consume itself, basically a loop or a cycle. Although the divine spark of the primordial first cause dissipates as it scatters outward and expands, spreading thin amongst time-space, it still exists within our conscious being. Just like we learned in the last couple videos concerning Gnostic lore, the divine spark at the top of the pyramid is still at the center of our collected consciousness. This expansion extends that divine spark that is yearning to experience itself. And to experience itself, it's not going to just choose joy and happiness and bliss. Just like you do with a video game, you would like there to be struggles and challenges in order to have the most impactful experience. After all, we've learned in our alchemical transmutation video that struggling and suffering is the equivalent of learning here in this reality that is of high density. But just as the Ouroboros symbol indicates, we seem to be at the tail end of a feedback loop, the mouth of which is God with a cap G. Now, before we get all Gnostic like the last video and compare this analogy to being eaten alive, like the Archons feeding on our suffering, that is not at all what this chart seems to indicate. In fact, I think it's quite the opposite. If God is in fact love itself personified, loosely speaking, then by experiencing this very love and exercising this love, we will be feeding the head of that Ouroboros, therefore causing God to further expand. And I'm reminded of the axiom, to serve man is to serve God. So despite being at the bottom of this pyramid, or as the Gnostic might say, the bottom of the food chain, it seems to be why this highest density of existence echoes throughout time-space and could possibly be important, if not the most important. If the very items that are furthest away from the divine source are able to wake up and realize it, that completely completes the cycle, thus giving us an answer to the first question in this video: why are we here? We learned in the last video that the first man, Adamu, was that of mud. And considering the old axiom coined as mud sat up, well, if mud can realize its own divinity, that is about as miraculous as it gets. So let's get into some details here. Fossil records show that humans first emerged on Earth about 1 million years ago, give or take about 1 million years. This should help us indicate exactly how tight the fossil records are thus far in science. And I know I'm a dick, but let me explain. Fossil records show that Homo erectus existed about 600,000 years ago, but then there is a gap of 100,000 years before the sudden emergence of what we would call modern man, or Homo sapien. After the emergence of Homo sapien, the fossil records show them disappearing completely for another 100,000 years. This leaves a 100,000-year gap between Neanderthal man and Homo sapien, not to mention Homo erectus at the beginning. Yet, DNA shows us that we actually share some genome with Neanderthal man, suggesting that we not only shared the planet, but also mated. Which makes sense considering I know a couple women out there who would fuck a Neanderthal as long as they had enough hammers. Speaking of hammers, it seems as if Neanderthal man was fully capable of using primitive tools, but their ability to further create more complex tools never arose. It's as if they started using tools one day and then continued using those very same tools without ever changing anything up, just before completely going extinct, and I mean poof, vanished. It seems as if they were taught to do something, but didn't have the symbolic brain capacity to expound upon it. Where this gets weirder is that when Homo sapiens suddenly reappeared in the fossil record, Neanderthal man disappeared. This indicates that we just beat them in the old game of war that, us humans seem to always play. But Neanderthal man was stronger, more robust, and in greater numbers by far than Homo sapien. So to kill them off in the form of battle doesn't really make any sense, does it? Plus you have that time gap. So we must have used our new cunning and evolved wit like in a game of chess? I mean, either way, the question arises, where did those smarts come from, considering there is no fossil record that leads up to Homo sapien? It's just a drastic change. So right off the bat, without any kind of pseudoscience, it is safe to say that Homo sapien popped up out of nowhere and in small numbers took over the world, despite the success of Neanderthal man before him. And then there are a number of archaeological finds that seems to just throw all of this previous information out the window. And that'd be an entire another video. When comparing these gaps in the fossil record to oral traditions passed down by indigenous people, we start to get into a little bit of a pickle. Almost every indigenous culture has a creation story that involves being created from people from the stars, usually specifically referring to Sirius B or the Pleiades. This reminds me quite a bit of how we used to treat the oral traditions of a flood myth before recently we found an ample amount of evidence of a great flood due to the Younger Dryas era.
Earth is a living and breathing, peaceful, slow-moving creature of the skies. We are a wretched and diseased, retarded young species. Will be the first to die.
The oldest known writing accepted thus far to mankind was written in cuneiform on what we call the Sumerian tablets. Tablet 3 of the Astrahasis text reads the following: Even the gods became afraid of the flood. They retreated. They went off to the heaven of Anu. There they are lying at the outside, cowering like dogs. Istar screams like a woman in labor. The lady of the god moans, she whose voice is so lovely. Ninti wept and was overcome with grief, saying, My creatures have become like flies. They filled the rivers like dragonflies. Their fatherhood was taken by the rolling sea. This is indicating that a mother figure of mankind could not bear the sight of this destruction. It goes on to describe how she was torn between staying with mankind as they suffered or to ascend up to heaven. Due to the fragments of the stone being in pieces, we do not know who answered her quandary, but the answer was clear: ascend up to heaven to reside in the house of offerings. The bulk of the Sumerian tablets are not considered to be fiction. That is, of course, with the exception of this story and the rest of it. Once translated, it was considered to be the first sci-fi. After all, we seem to be talking about spaceships here. While it bears striking similarity to the biblical stories of a great flood, it was still considered fiction until recently, as we have uncovered the fact that a global flood did indeed occur during the Younger Dryas era. So now we can accept that a global flood did occur, like the oral traditions indicate, but this particular part of the story, however, must still remain fiction, right? I can't help but find it strange that a woman named Phyllis Schlemmer described the same story even down to the weeping of the gods and even accurately stating their names. She made these claims before the science of the Younger Dryas was definitive, so her claims must also be fiction because it was obtained through channeling. But I am forced to ask myself though, what are the chances of this lucky guess? In school, we are taught that Nikola Tesla was a genius and invented the tech of our modern day. Yet they conveniently left out the part that Nikola Tesla himself made clear. He claimed to have not come up with this information on his own, but gained it by channeling a higher source. The same goes for Edgar Cayce when it comes to healing thousands of people, yet he is not even mentioned in school whatsoever. After all, he did not have a medical degree. Yet, when doctors themselves were at a loss for explanations, they came to Edgar for answers. The truth always turns out to be stranger than fiction, but we refuse to let that sink in. The above-mentioned so-called gods that Phyllis spoke with said their goal was to teach man and to prepare Earth for a very specific kind of soul to inhabit for a very specific reason. It was told to her that these creatures could change their appearance within the psyche of man in order to take on a form that primitive man could understand. In our previous video, we compared this to how we appear to characters in a video game, because those characters cannot possibly comprehend the player without an avatar. And speaking of the last video, we broke down the layout of this map showing the worlds between the physical world that we live in and the primordial first cause, and of course, all of the inconceivably strange life forms that connect us. All of which, of course, seems like nonsense and imagination upon first glance. But after breaking down the inconsistencies within the fossil records, it eerily seems to answer many questions that have become a thorn in the ass of archaeology and science to this day. It has recently become safe to say that the more advanced we become in the field of archaeology and science, the closer we get to bridging the gap between it and the oral traditions passed down through mythology, ancient religions, and esoteric thought. While we should always maintain a healthy skepticism of all new earth-shattering information, we need to simultaneously recognize the fact that slowly but steadily, the stark logic of modern-day science is beginning to run parallel with the unbelievable. Because when the two come crashing together, we need to be ready. So, to play my small part in preventing what could possibly be an inevitable event of mass hysteria, I would like to dive into the outskirts of what our minds can comprehend and bring disillusion to what we have been taught is impossible. When comparing these gaps in the fossil record to oral traditions passed down by indigenous people, we start to get into a little bit of a pickle. Almost every indigenous culture has a creation story that involves being created from people from the stars, usually specifically referring to Sirius B or the Pleiades. This reminds me quite a bit of how we used to treat the oral traditions of a flood myth before recently we found an ample amount of evidence of a great flood due to the Younger Dryas era. This is the same way that we used to treat the stories of a city called Troy and another called Babylon that were only dismissed as legend until irrefutable evidence popped up to conclude it as fact. In fact, the more that archaeology progresses, the more these ancient oral traditions seem to come to life. So let's pretend for a moment that there's more to the oral traditions than just the imagination of ancient man, who we are told didn't have an imagination in the first place. And the contradictions are just... The idea of channeling ancient sentient beings is enough to make any skeptic change the channel, including me, until I think about the fact that you are watching me over a phone right now and are quite literally, and I mean quite literally, channeling me as we speak because of technology. Let's set down Occam's razor for just a moment and explore what Phyllis Schlemmer and many others have said about the history of man and how it compares to these gaps in the fossil record and ancient oral traditions. Schlemmer was supposedly in contact with a being that was known in Egypt as Tahiti, known by many other ages as Thoth, but in today's age as just Tom. Tom indicated that a species resembling man emerged about 20 million years ago, which already kind of helps us out with some of the strange artifacts that have been found that just don't fit in the timeline that we have been taught. But they were here to help develop the planet as a paradise for a specific genre of souls that would eventually inhabit it. At the same time, there were beings that walked the earth to prepare it for its particular density. That would be set later for
other souls to inhabit. It is then said that extraterrestrial colonies of humanoid beings began to seed onto the Earth particular outcasts from other civilizations by oftentimes mixing the DNA of their gene pool with that of the creatures of Earth. There seems to be experimentation going on that had an agenda. This helps us explain the sudden disappearances and replacements of certain kinds of humans with the 100,000-year gaps that we see in the fossil records. It also kind of helps us explain why human babies are so weak and helpless compared to, well, any other creature that is native to Earth. A concept of which doesn't quite line up with natural evolution, considering that the whole idea of evolution in the first place is for a species to get stronger and better. Tom insists that the beginning of man's advancement is dated to about 32,400 BC because of a species called the Hoovids, or Huva, which obviously is where we get the name for the Hoover vacuum cleaner. Make the connections, people! The people indigenous to Earth were said to call this species the hawk, or equivalent to that kind of bird, because this is apparently how they appeared to them. This is when Earth began to go from a paradise to becoming a popular spot for beings or souls who were not wanted on their home planet or home dimensional density. This is interesting considering that anthropologists have just recently indicated that modern man came to its full brain capacity about 35,000 years ago. Also interesting, indigenous man was said to be quite small compared to our visitors, the Hoovids and the Alteans. And keep them in mind later, by the way, the Alteans. But they were both considered giants at this time. This, of course, connects us to several other oral traditions and mythology, as well as skeletons in the closet at the Smithsonian Museum. The attempt to teach native earthlings agriculture and the arts was a practical failure in the beginning, because once the natives spread out on their own without the guidance of the Hoovids or the Alteans, they were helpless to the elements due to being underdeveloped. But the earthlings whose genome had been mixed with that of the Alteans went on to create a society that has been referred to as, drumroll please, Atlantis, or Altea, if you want to get back to the original source of it. This channeling of Tom by Phyllis Schlemmer indicates the fall of Atlantis to be 13,000 years ago. While rummaging in the Akashic records, though, Edgar Cayce also indicated the fall of Atlantis to have been 13,000 years ago. And if you are not already thinking of it, I might as well tell you that modern geologists are just now today accepting the evidence presented by Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock of a great gigantic catastrophe mentioned on this channel many times as the Younger Dryas era that happened, well, 13,000 years ago. But what happened to Atlantis? Was it a natural disaster? Was it man-made mutual assured destruction like in war? Or could it be that it was indeed wiped out on purpose by external forces? Well, like many other conundrums discussed on this channel, it seems to be none of the above as well as all of the above. Why? Well, this common theme that runs down the center of our human race and existence is terrifying. We just keep repeating ourselves. It seems as though the fall of Atlantis was due to hubris, that being the abuse of our power and technology in conjunction and adjacent to the natural order of the Earth. This shouldn't be surprising as it is strikingly familiar, but with a slightly different plot twist, as we'll see here. Edgar Cayce spoke about the Atlanteans having a powerful and terrible vibrational crystal that produced energy. Powerful because it could be used as a tool, but just like any tool, like a hammer, for example, you can use it to build a shed or you can beat yourself in the face with it, therefore causing old Papa Casey to refer to it as terrible. It was said that the elites of Atlantis used this tool to propagate their own power, thus abusing it, creating a chain reaction of resonance adjacent to Earth's natural frequency. This chain reaction, like dominoes, got out of control, leading up to a long set of natural disasters, global natural disasters. Parallel to this legend is an invention by the great mind of Nikola Tesla. Nikola understood that the Earth had a natural vibration to it. He utilized a sort of iron pillar as an oscillator and would adjust the frequency until he found a particular resonance that would cause the Earth to vibrate or shake. Now, this makes me want to go down a rabbit hole of how the builders of the pyramids might have lifted the stones into place, but we'll save that for another video. As Nikki adjusted the frequency of the oscillator, everyone in nearby areas went into panic as their buildings began to shake. Upon realizing this, though, Lil Nikki shut it down and abandoned that particular research. But not to worry, though, that research is currently in the safe hands of the U.S. government today.
Some of my best friends are scientists.
And I love them, and they do such good work, but they are going to kill us all.
Atomic bomb, baby.
If you cut the atom this way, it can power the world with electricity, and if you cut it that way, it can blow everything up. Guess which one we tried first? Like, that's just who we are. 1918, they had a sample, so the idea was they were going to reanimate it so that they could study it. The 1918 pandemic flu. They had a little sample of it, and it hadn't been a scourge in the earth for 100 years, and they thought to themselves, what if we just, I don't know, woke it up? And nobody in the room was like, no, let's not do that. But they did that. Here's how I believe the world ends. And I say this to you in sincerity. We are a screwed up world. Racism, income inequality, fascism, authoritarianism, all these horrible, horrible things. Natural resources that run down. That'll all be fine. The world ends, the last words man utters are somewhere in a lab. A guy goes, it worked.
So let's look at another couple coincidences, this time involving language, and as well as the scattering of languages. It is said that the indigenous people were only able to communicate by grunts and animal noises, but due to experiments, splicing, tutoring conducted by the Alteans, a common language of purely consonants came to be so that these differing civilizations could communicate. This seems to answer the question that has plagued philologists and linguists for many years, that being how many of today's languages appear to sprout from one original language that has been lost to history. And it just so happens to be that the ancient Hebrew language did not involve any vowels. And ancient Hebrew, of course, is where we get the bulk of today's biblical doctrines. Some of you know there are a few more connections and coincidences with this, considering the Hebrew language, but I'll have to refer you to one of our previous videos called Lost Knowledge and Hidden Wisdom for all of that. Language of a common form would have been necessary to build gigantic, impossible structures like the Hindu temples that we see today that actually have moving and rotating parts that frankly seem to be like generators, and structures like the Great Pyramids that are found all over the world. During one of these channeling sessions, it was indicated that the Great Pyramid of Giza was meant to be an indestructible time capsule that laid out for future generations the dimensions of our place in the universe. Well, it just so happens to be that we are only finding out today that the pyramids perfectly and mathematically encapsulate the dimensions of Earth's size and the ratios of the relationship between the sun, Earth, and Moon. I'll have to stop there though, considering that we covered that extensively also in the previous video, Lost Knowledge and Hidden Wisdom. Yeah, you're gonna wanna have to, I guess, click on that one after this. Feed my algorithm. Feed it like the Archons. Click on my videos. That was my attempt at hypnosis. Should I do this, or maybe I need a spoon or something? How the fuck did Dolores Cannon hypnotize people? I want to find that out. She got people hypnotized, like people who couldn't be, unless it's all fake. I don't know. So There are many more connections between this theory and mythologies, religions, and of course, brand new scientific discoveries that I just won't be able to fit into one video. But nevertheless, to cap this thing off, let's define what healthy skepticism means. I want to be clear that what I mean by healthy skepticism specifically refers to not getting fucked over by another party due to false information. What it does not mean is to build a wall between yourself and new information that just so happens to be abstract to you and your current place on your path. In fact, that's the opposite of what it means. That would be called ignorance, literally. To be blunt, if you were a huge fan of my Gnostic lore videos but dismissed the stories put forth here today, you might have missed the point. At the same time, if you loved our video entitled Ancient Teachers of Man, but completely dismissed the names involved in this story, you have willfully ignored several obvious parallels. After all, the Hoover sounds a lot like Jehovah, which I'm assuming that Jehovah's Witnesses are sponsored by Hoover and only use Hoover specifically for their carpet cleaning. And Hoover, if you're watching this right now, I'll sponsor your product considering not being related to it whatsoever. Hoover's probably out of business for freaking 10 years now. There's some like fucking 22-year-old watching this right now going, who is Hoover? But the only difference between this story that we have covered here today and those prior videos that have become quite popular on this channel is the concept of visitors from other dimensions and or outer space. The Gnostic lore series is genred by a biblical personality. Our video, Ancient Teachers of Man, and the Black Cube video, of course, that haunts me to this day, seem to fall under the genre of mythology. What we talked about here today seems to me at least like the same story or even a sequel to those stories, but with a hue or tint of sci-fi to it. Why does this cause so many people, including the open-minded, to just shut it out? In the intro of this video, we stated the obvious, that truth seems to always be stranger than fiction. Knowing damn well that this is the case, we should understand our own psychological biases enough to realize what our ego tends to do to us and our souls. Logic is useful here in the real world, where we have jobs and taxes and credit scores. But when it comes to creation myths and the obvious fact that something did happen once upon a time, because I mean, here we are, let's not slit our throats on Occam's razor. Let's use logic, but be careful not to carry it around on our backs. You have a slip disc anyway, and you need to go take a hot Epsom salt bath, you damn cripple. We need to look in the mirror and face ourselves and realize that if the real definitive truth was to come up, introduce itself, and then bite you in the ass, well, we probably wouldn't even recognize it. I don't know if this story is true or not, despite how well it fits into the gaps and connects the puzzle pieces. But I do know that if it was the truth, our limited lingual mammalian-brained species would be the first to throw its baby out with the bathwater.
Show yourself.
A little girl was playing in the sand by the ocean, and despite the perfect scenery, she was bored. You see, she was known for her vivid imagination, which often got in the way of schooling the fuck out of her in order to make her fit in our little box. She had been secretly praying night after night that something extraordinary would happen in her life to strip her away from the everyday regularity that we adults depend on to survive. While peering out into the ocean, on this day her prayers were answered, because cutting through the water in her direction she saw a dolphin. This dolphin must have been tangled in seaweed or some netting that trailed behind it, and it was coming to shore for a helping human hand. She had heard that this happens often and was very eager to share a connection with such a wonderful friend from the sea. But as it approached the shore, it stopped just short of her eyes' clarity, and she called out, "It's okay to come close, I want to help you." To her amazement, right next to the this dolphin, a woman's head popped up out of the water and looked at the girl. With a sigh of relief, the girl asked, "Are you here to help the dolphin?" Seeing that this little girl had no fear and was pouring with love and curiosity, the woman began to emerge from the water. Quickly occurred that this woman was in fact what she thought was the dolphin, and as she realized this, there was an audible snap, a noise that the girl assumed must have been the woman's bathing suit strap being pulled like a rubber band and released, clapping against her skin. As the woman got closer and began to climb to shore, the girl noticed several attributes that did not add up. The woman's skin was a glossy bluish gray. What she thought was seaweed or a net dragging behind was in fact her hair, and most fascinating was that this woman did not seem to have elbows or knees, but instead her arms and legs were like that of a squid with no suckers and equally smooth fingers. Just as she noticed the face had no eyelids, her awe was interrupted by a series of clicks and pops followed by a sharp whistle that came from her mouth consisting of a beautiful row of small pointed teeth, and then the snap. The noise of her bathing suit clapping against her skin was actually two flaps just above her bare chest, just beneath her collarbones. These flaps opened and collapsed shut, creating this crisp noise. Despite this woman's face seeming more frog-like than human, this little girl now knew what she was looking at and was not shy to announce to the being, "You're an angel. You are a mermaid. I have never seen anything like you and I love you so much." With no hesitation, the girl ran up and put her hands on the woman of the sea, continuing to exclaim out loud, "You are not a fish. You are smooth and graceful. I have to get my mother to see you. Will you wait here while I go get her?" There was another series of clicks and pops that could only mean one thing. "Of course I will wait here for you." Running to her mother, who was working on her tan, the girl exclaimed, "Mother," but she said mother instead of mom because she had a bad case of being British. She said, "Mother, you have got to see this. There is a mermaid." The mom got up, expecting to partake in another one of her child's frankly overtly imagined games with a slight disgruntlement. But as she came around the bend, she got a glimpse of a wounded animal stuck on the beach. She said, "We need to go get your father. He will know what to." Before she could finish her sentence, her entire world came collapsing in on her in a moment that would practically ruin her life, haunting her until the day she died. Because as she uttered those words, this assumed wounded animal heard and turned its head and made direct eye contact with the mother. Again, we have to remember that this is a mother, not a mom, because of all the British. This eye contact was not like that of a dog, but instead the paralyzing stare that can only come from a person. The mother was completely frozen in absolute terror when the unthinkable happened. A series of clicks and pops followed by a sharp whistle made it clear to the mother that despite the face being more like a frog than that of a dolphin, that this was a hideous monster, a creature from the depths of the abyss and a nightmare to even lay eyes on. As the clicks and pops woke her from her paralyzed fear, the mother grabbed her daughter's arm, a grab that would later leave bruises, and yanked her daughter away in such panic that it dislocated the young girl's shoulder. The adrenaline hit the girl too. Unaware of her new injury, she cried out, "What is it, mother? What is it?" The mother cried, panicked, "It is a monster. It's a demon. Get away, run." Understanding that her mother knew best, the girl and the British mother ran their little asses off back to the human streets where they were safe from this angelic mermaid, this beautiful abomination that should be hunted down and killed, or at least locked in a cage and studied for the heinous crime of kinda looking like a frog. My viewers will know that my favorite part of this story is not the cryptoid that it revolves around, but instead the vast difference in reaction between the mother and the little girl. Because living in regret today, this now old woman and her adult daughter do not skip an hour of each day without wondering what they could have learned on that fateful day that changed their life forever if they had just sat down in the sand and trusted the instincts of the once little girl who who seem to manifest through invitation via prayer a message from a being that they could just not handle. This is the unfortunate difference between children and adults in today's age. To the little girl, this miracle was no surprise. After all, we are here. Why wouldn't there be somebody else? To the mother, this miracle was a nightmare. After all, we are here, and that is the finished product. Anything else to impose on that reality must be demonic. What if I told you that this problem was not limited to today's age? What if I told you that this has happened before? And as uncomfortable as it sounds, what if I told you that the initiation into the mysteries of all ages since antiquity hinged solely on the ability to confront this fear? And lastly, what if I showed you proof that our current society and all of our technological comforts are in debt to a people called the Dogon? People who had the balls to look one of these Nommos square in the face and say, "Teach us to build society in your image."
So by now you have heard me mention the Dogon people having advanced modern knowledge of the cosmos and quantum physics for thousands of years before us. So let's take a closer look at what they know and how they came to know it. Indeed, there is a lot of information in the books that just doesn't find its way online. Check this out. On the left, we have a drawing by high initiates of the Dogon, illustrating the orbit and trajectory of the binary star system called Sirius. And on the right, we have a modern day depiction of the same stars. I encourage any upcoming astronomers to pause this video and find a discrepancy, as I myself am not qualified to do so, but it looks identical to me. And Sirius B is invisible to the naked eye, as it is a white dwarf star. It was argued by scientists in denial that they must have picked up this knowing from anthropologists in recent times and added it to their belief system, even though Sirius B had only been discovered 4 years before gathering this information from the Dogon. However, that skepticism is easily squashed by the fact that the Dogon relics are often older than America itself. Even Carl Sagan could not accept this information, claiming that there must be something off here. Controversy arose for some time after this. Arguments came in hot from both sides. Arguments that stopped dead in their tracks when the unthinkable happened in 1995. You see, the Dogon also spoke of a Sirius C, a third star, making this a trinary star system. And here is a Dogon sand drawing of a planet orbiting C and C orbiting B, and of course B orbiting A. So, dude, like something out of Star Wars, this world has 3 suns. Something unthinkable to us. Not only was this idea ridiculous to us, but it was used as an argument against the Dogon, claiming that they were at this point just making it up. But while studying the orbit of Sirius B, which takes 50 of our years, there was a discrepancy found. An anomaly in its orbit made it clear that another object of incredible density was affecting the orbit of B. And in 1995, astronomers unaware of the Dogon claims came to the assured conclusion that orbiting B was another star, this time a red dwarf star that is not only invisible to the naked eye, but also invisible to our modern equipment. What is also alarming is that the Dogon described B as a white dwarf and C as a red dwarf, only for us to confirm these findings later. And I hesitate to say confirm these findings, as we'll talk about that at the end of the video. They also well understood the idea of elliptical orbits, describing it as egg in shape, back when we still assumed that orbits were more circular. And while Copernicus and Gianardo Bruno were being executed for saying it, the Dogon understood that the Earth was a sphere and that planets move around stars. So, I mean, who are the barbarians here, really? Even though this finding did not make the news, it was plenty to get our skeptics to shut the up, because the Dogon were not only right, but light years ahead of us in astronomy. We have to keep in mind that these people do not use today's tech, but instead have a process of hermetic initiation passed down from Egypt, and we'll come back to all that jazz later. Realizing that these natives that we tend to ignorantly look down on had knowledge that we sure could use, anthropologists made their return in earnest to find out more from these ancient initiates. And they got so much more than they bargained for. And hold on to your buttholes, because this is where all heaven breaks loose. After earning the trust of the Dogon, which is very hard to do, by the way, and I can't stress that part enough, as this is quite literally sacred, forbidden knowledge, an anthropologist named Marcel was invited to speak with the highest initiate of the Dogon people, an initiate who was a woman. And I can't help but feel that these people are a true reflection of ancient times, as we know that the Catholic Church in modern times has gone through great lengths to dehumanize women, something we covered on this channel before. But becoming a high initiate to these hermetic or Kemetic people is no walk in the park. The person must be highly skilled in geometry and quite the polymath to gain this position. And here we have a woman of a native tribe who dwarfs the education of any Harvard graduate you can find. And even those who put attended Harvard in their bio without a scrap of diplomacy. But Sirius B, being invisible to the naked eye because of its smaller size, has a strong tug on Sirius A nonetheless. This is what causes this binary dance in which they seem to kind of orbit each other. Represented by a tiny seed, the Dogon insists that Sirius B is extremely heavy because it's made out of metals that don't exist here on Earth and are very dense. One of these metals is called Sagala. It is part of their mythology that Sirius B has control over Sirius A despite its size, and seems to keep it in check, so to speak. This is a fun fact because it was quite a mystery for a long time to astronomers as to how a giant star like Sirius A can be altered by such a small orbiting body that is a white dwarf. But all of this passed down knowledge checks out quite nicely with our modern findings, except for the part where the Dogon describes Sirius B as weighing 480 ass loads, something that you think I made up. I didn't. And I really wonder now exactly the ratio of pounds to this so elegantly phrased ass load is. How much is one ass load? I don't know. It was found that the Dogon could name the moons of Jupiter and Saturn and describe the activity of electrons and atoms with accuracy despite a difference in phrasing. For example, while we were still speculating that electrons orbit around protons and neutrons like a planet, they described them as being like a cloud of possible outcomes, which again was later found to be absolutely true. When asked about Saturn, it is no surprise that they knew it had rings, but they described it as being the planet of limitations. I'll repeat that. They called Saturn the planet of limitations. So obviously people who are not versed in the esoteric, as we here are, must have assumed, or I shouldn't say must have, they did assume that the Dogon meant it as being the last planet in our solar system, something that any viewer of this channel knows better about. As Saturn is indeed, well, never mind, you saw the damn video. God, I can't believe I called it a hexagram. 3 times. I'll never live this down. So anyway, it hit the fan. But it gets so much crazier because the obvious question that we are all wondering also occurred to the French anthropologist. How do you know about the nature of the universe? And the answer they got was enough to turn our Caucasian friends even more white and shake the scientific community down to its bones, because when asked how they knew, the Dogon replied, "We were taught these things by the Nommos, water people from a planet orbiting Sirius C." If you thought modern science had problems accepting the Dogon having knowledge in the first place, well, you can imagine that this little nugget came in hot and caused a shitstorm of utter denial. Even scientists on the fence about the great mysteries heard this and unanimously stated the Dogon are right about everything else, but they're wrong about this. Rude. We hit a brick wall. And if it wasn't for Robert Temple exploding on the scene with his book, The Serious Mystery, all of this enigma would have been buried by our society of denial. You see, despite the Dogon being far from liars, being descendants of an Egyptian priests, and not needing anything from us at all, as they live off the land, their word is not proof, because words and stories, no matter how accurate, are not proof. Proof to us means something that we can capture, lock in a tank, and own. Own so that we can cut it up and strip it down. To have proof of non-human intelligence, we are required to strip away all its dignity and poke and prod at it and expose it naked for our peers to review. And this kind of science is quite alien to the Dogon, as you might imagine. And I often wonder what it says about us in today's age. Are we thorough and skeptical, or are we ignorant and egotistical? The Dogon have given us drawings of this cosmic knowledge as well as illustrations of what the Nommos actually looked like. And as you might expect, this ancient visitation has led to an ample amount of mythology from all over the world, involving teachers from the sea. If you follow the path of this mythology, you can see the progression of a game of telephone, so to speak, from the original description into a slow devolution of making these beings more and more human, eventually coming to the point in Greek myth where the bottom half is a fish and the top half is just a dude. And it is no surprise that Greek mythology is what we teach in schools, considering it is kinda the most watered down and convoluted of ancient myths. Like being the Carlos Mencia of myth, they just ripped off and changed the stories before them and made it their own. Certain aspects do remain though. For example, it was said that Zeus could not walk because his legs were fused together. But Sumerian and Egyptian mythology, however, is so staggeringly close to what the Dogon say that it seems that they also had the privilege of laying eyes on these visitors as well. Just like Oannes of Babylon, the Sumerians described Enki as amphibious, and he would be seen laying sprawled out in the swamps in his downtime, laying on his back with his belly up, something to keep in mind for later. Several other myths tell of these fish people who had to be carried on platforms through the cities while seated, as their bottom half was not capable of walking. As you can imagine, Catholic people today probably don't even realize that this is why we carry the Pope in the same fashion on a platform while he wears that fish on his head as a hat. Just like Christmas traditions, we do shit without wondering where it came from. And that episode is coming, by the way. But Robert Temple changed the scene when he wrote his book, and I very much enjoyed his take on it. But a fair warning, this brilliant man is certainly a bit of an asshole. In his book, he mentions Timothy Leary, inviting him to speak, and his answer was not only a firm no, but he said that he despised so-called drug culture. What? But that's... Read Ram Dass and Timothy Leary's book. They transcended the cultures at the time. But he also calls out anybody who he feels is guilty of over-speculation. God, I hope he doesn't see this channel. Hide me from Robert Temple, guys. He was also not at all a fan of Zecharia Sitchin, calling him a very unpleasant man, and then went as far as to say this. And get ready for the sting.
I have a very strong dislike for Sitchin. He's a very unpleasant man. I don't know if he's still alive.
No, he passed away several years ago.
Well, good riddance. But, he was a very unpleasant man. Really, really, really unpleasant man.
Oof. I mean, damn. He regularly rails against the ancient civilization theory involving Atlantis, claiming that the high strangeness involved with the Sumerian Egyptian cultures popping up all at once out of nowhere was due to the intervention of these watery beings called the Nommos. But speaking of which, some of these later depictions look a lot like people in fish costumes, don't they? I would be halfway kidding when I say this, but y'all remember when they flew those drones over the uncontacted tribe? I'm not sure if that was real or not. But what if this is the case of what if the Nommos were just Atlantean people fucking with the Dogon? But, no, of course, that is silly. The level of teaching and knowledge delivered by these people does not at all point to any sort of Atlantean hoax, as funny as that would be. God, I hope Temple doesn't see this. In his defense, though, Temple went through a lot of hell and threats when his book came out, and many friends and colleagues became enemies, some of which went out of their way to attempt to sabotage his work. It seems that the closer he got to the truth, the more his colleagues acted like our British mother in the intro of this video. And also, in Temple's defense, he had some trouble with his sponsors, namely the rich, where they would well, I'm just gonna read this account because this is hilarious. Some highly qualified experts were prepared to help us, but we could not even cover their expenses. Eccentric multimillionaires have wasted my time toying with the notion of paying for some serious mystery research. But they have always turned out to be hopeless characters. Most of them have been egomaniacs. One in particular wasn't, but he was just as useless as the rest. There is something about very rich people that makes them a complete waste of time, like over-endowed birds of paradise who show their colorful feathers only in some remote forest where only the monkeys can see them. It's a great analogy. And the strangest thing of all is that every time I have ever had any dealings with a very rich person, I have always ended up poorer. They have some way of sucking money out of your pocket by a vacuum mechanism. Woo! So, I mean, yeah, Robert certainly had a zero bullshit policy. Temple also had a great argument that the Sphinx was a dog and not a lion, as I have said previously on this channel. In fact, it turns out the Sphinx may have been Anubis. And if that is so, I don't have to say how much this connects all of the wisdom of the Dogon with the idea of Sirius being associated with the afterlife of both humans and the Nommos. John Anthony West is known for his proof of the Sphinx being much older than we thought based on the water erosion. We have all seen this, and certainly it sold me. However, Temple swooped in like the bulldog scholar that he is and pulled up an ample amount of evidence that the Sphinx was once surrounded by an enormous moat. This moat was specifically meant to protect ancient stone records beneath the Sphinx from looters and the eyes of the profane. And anyone who wanted to get into the chambers beneath the Sphinx would have needed advanced scuba diving gear and be well equipped with the craft. Something that we could not do, but an amphibious being certainly could. This reminds us of several portions of our video, Thoth of Agartha, and the connections between this video and the Mars video, they vibe so much that I'm still having trouble taking all of this in. It's like these last videos have been all sequels of each other and by complete accidents, and they're just all so well connected despite the mystery that we're left with. Despite being a desert now, it is very ironic because that it's a desert now because it was once highly associated with water, even in mythology. And the Nile often rose all the way up to the pyramids themselves, making this place, as the Dogon have claimed, to be a perfect place at one time for amphibious beings. It has been said in many books, even by skeptics, that intelligent life in the universe is much more likely to be like that of a cephalopod, that is, like a squid or an octopus. And I shouldn't have to tell you about how intelligent these problem-solving octopuses are. Octopi. Octopuses? Or whatever, moving on. But unlike the Sumerians, who considered the Anunnaki to be creator gods, the Dogon make it clear that the amphibious Nommos from Sirius B or C were people just like us, and there was a greater source of both of us humans and them that they considered to be God. They called this creator Amma. Which again seems very close to other deities like the Egyptian Amun, and that's where we seem to get the phrase amen. It also seems a lot like the Sumerian god Anu. The likelihood of all of them having such a similar word for the same idea is, very, very unlikely. They back up this concept of a creator by pointing out the harmonic difference of sizes between our sun and Sirius, the son of the Nommos. Sirius B has a mass of 1.053, that of our sun. It also has a radius of 0.0078 of our local star. This ratio lines up accurately with what is called the comma of Pythagoras. What is scary about this is that when we see this kind of mathematics displayed in pyramids and temples, we are amazed, but we can accept it because those were built by somebody, designed. But to see these same mathematics with stars begins to have a haunting theme, because in the world of sacred geometry and musical theory, this ratio represents a perfect harmonic. Robert Temple states that our pyramids, being a representation of those numbers, are a way to signal to us that, and I quote, "This is a symbolic representation of a real cosmic fact," unquote. If you want to get deep into the mathematics of all this, I suggest picking up the book for yourself. But basically, it seems that the Dogon were also right about the relationship of our sun and the Nommos' multiple suns. Described like quantum entanglement on a macrocosmic scale, these stars are connected in such a way when one is affected, the same happens to the resonance of the others. Like when a tuning fork is struck, none of the other tuning forks nearby will vibrate except for the ones that are tuned to this same frequency. Those tuning forks will vibrate at the same rate despite having no contact with the original tuning fork. So it seems that our entire local star system are practically sets of twins, and very much by design. Well, as above, so below, this brings up once again the Great Pyramids of Giza. Although the Great Pyramids are laid out like the star system Orion, this seems to be a placeholder for what can't be seen by the naked eye. And old Rob T has this to say about that. We should never lose sight of the fact that Orion's importance is that of a substitute for an invisible counterpart. The significance of Orion is thus derivative, not intrinsic. Sirius B was represented amongst the stars by a visible substitute of Orion, and was represented in the solar system by a local substitute we call the planet Mercury. So the math involved concerning the differences of the size of the stars in Sirius and ours happens to match the size differences of the Great Pyramids by ratio. They're a reflection of the above. The mysteries of these pyramids seem to be more and more staggering the more we learn about them, because their sizes are in perfect ratio with our sun, Sirius A and Sirius B. On this, Temple writes, I have now discovered a further association which I suspected in the 1970s when the existing astrophysical measurements were imprecise so that my instinctive hunch could not be confirmed. Now, however, the astrophysical measurements available since the publication of the new figures in astrophysical data in 1992 make it possible for me to suggest this correspondence. The figures appearing in the former reference book in 1973 were inaccurate, and it did not yield the intuitively sensed correspondence which I strongly felt at that time. I am referring to the strange fact that the Great Pyramid stands beside another pyramid which is nearly but not quite the same size. This always seemed very peculiar. I felt that it must symbolize something, but what? I look upon the Great Pyramid as being associated with the Sirius cult, and I felt that it must represent the star Sirius B. I knew that our own sun had a mass nearly, but not quite that of Sirius B. Couldn't the two pyramids represent by some key measurement of theirs the relative masses of our sun and Sirius B? However, it was not possible to pursue this notion in the 1970s because at that time the mass of Sirius B was incorrectly believed to be 0.98 that of our sun, and such relative measurements did not correspond with the two pyramids. However, that situation has now changed. According to the new figure, Sirius B has a mass of 1.053 that of our sun. It is now possible to make a correlation whereby the Great Pyramid may be seen to represent Sirius B and the Pyramid of Kefron may be seen to represent our sun. The significance of the mass ratio between Sirius B and our sun suggests that our solar system and the Sirius system are elements of a larger entity, which is a self-organizing open system, what is called in thermodynamics a dissipative structure far from thermal equilibrium. But let us give it an actual name. I propose to call it the Anubis cell, and these are the words of Temple, not my own. Perhaps the Sirius system is the actual location of the, quote, other world in more than one sense. Inspiration may even come to humans on Earth from the Sirius system by harmonic resonance articulated by the still undefined Anubis field of the Anubis cell, and this might be instantaneously transmitted not as a signal but by harmonic resonance response within the continuous Anubis field subsisting within this cosmic cell. It may be alive. The vast ordering principle may be an entity. Whew. Despite being a little bit of a butthole, the man's on his. Oh, we should also keep in mind that the Egyptian hieroglyph for Sirius was a triangular face of a pyramid. Robert Duvall was able to work out the math that showed the shaft of the so-called King's Chamber once pointed directly at the star Sirius, as the King's Chamber pointed to Orion. If you saw our last video about the face on Mars, you might have noticed that the cluster of three-sided pyramids nearby were laid out like the Pleiades star system and Orion combined, going through the face there, something that is mathematically impossible to happen naturally, but I digress. Sirius has been called the dog star by many isolated civilizations. And how strange is it that Anubis, who weighs our hearts against a feather after death, has a dog's head? And the Dogon, like the ancient Egyptians, claimed that the Sirius star system is where the soul goes when the body dies. So back to the Dogon lore, they claim that the Nommos parked a mothership within our solar system and called this mothership the star of the 10th moon. And then it was said that in a fiery blaze, they sent down a sister ship in order to make contact with us. This mothership they have sand drawings of and show it in different phases that implies that it could be expanded and contracted at will. This seems to me a lot less like interstellar travel through thrust and more of a wormhole or portal type of deal going on. Even the illustration they make of the arrival of this ship seems to look a lot like some kind of rip in space-time, as opposed to an actual fueled thrust mechanism. But Temple argues that they used rockets and suspended animation for their travel here, like in our sci-fi movies, because the Dogon drawings of these ships look like rockets. And although they do have a phallic-like rocket sense to me, they really resemble obelisks like in Egypt, and I can't help but notice that each one has this set of 7 spheres within it that remind me a lot of the alignment of the chakras that it takes to to come out of the body astrally, but that is only speculation. Also in tune with this idea of entering our reality from the outside of its hard drive instead of interstellar travel by motion comes these direct words from the Dogon, who say, when the ark was descending, space had 4 angles. When the ark was down, space had 4 sides. And if you create that shape in your mind, and you're a regular of this channel, I don't really have to give you any hints as to what that seems to indicate. Something else that Temple writes up that I really can't get on board with, but feel like I should mention here, is that the 10th moon of Saturn is called Phoebe, is the one moon that we cannot get a good photo of. In fact, it does seem to be perfectly round, as if it were either artificial or completely made of water. We have heard of these airships of old that, even before we had airplanes, would go around and collect fresh water to the astonishment of farmers and even city folk. City folk. I just said city folk. But there are ancient accounts of this throughout history. If we connect that to what we just said about Phoebe, we can't help but be reminded of what the Babylonians said about Enki, who warned mankind about the coming flood. It was said that Enki would sleep in a freshwater receptacle shaped like the ark that he had instructed man to make, an ark called Abzu, not to be confused with the black metal band. Temple seems to indicate that this so-called star of the 10th moon that matches some of the anomalies of Phoebe orbiting Saturn might be a sanctuary for those who are now stuck in the solar system and for whatever reason cannot return to the Sirius star system. And I'm going to refrain from ranting about fallen angels that could not return to heaven, as it might be an entire another rabbit hole. But with a low 3% reflectivity and an extremely elaborate elliptical orbit and a very low density compared to all of its sibling moons, this particular moon of Saturn is indeed unusually difficult for us to study. We just can't seem to get a clear picture of it, and it seems to be on purpose. But speaking of Saturn, the great Plutarch held the opinion that Anubis very simply is Kronos. And of course, Kronos being time, the devourer, and spelt with an H is synonymous with Saturn. Saturn, of course, was the chief god prior to Zeus, aka Jupiter. So a cosmic change took place. And if we stick with our axiom of as above, so below, a parallel function would have also happened on Earth at the same time. So let's check that out with our similar timelines. The Dogon maintained that when the Nommos landed on Earth, they, quote, crushed the fox, thus making his future domination over the Earth, which the fox had made. This causes Robert Temple to hypothesize that man's brutish nature was sufficiently subdued in our distant past, hence crushing the fox within all of us. But I am reminded of a time when there were multiple species of humans on Earth, including Neanderthals, who hunted, raped, and ate Homo sapiens, sometimes even for sport. As you guys might know from previous videos, Neanderthals seem to disappear in the blink of an eye from our timeline, according to our rough fossil records. So, just like our recent events of UIPs shutting down nuclear facilities that are about to go to war, I wonder if something similar happened in the past concerning the brutish and fox-like nature of Neanderthal man, and in a way, clearing the path for us sapiens and some of us homos. In the Epic of Gilgamesh, our main protagonist has a dream of a star that is so heavy that it can't be lifted with mortal efforts. It is said that it descended from heaven and was connected like a thread to Anu, that Sumerian deity who reminds us of Amma, the universal architect of the Dogon. Gilgamesh is said to be attracted to the star as if that of a woman. And if you speak allegorical myth, I could see this indicating some kind of gravitation, metaphorically calling him a planet for this particular part of the epic, which makes it interesting that he was accompanied by 50 anonymous companions. 50 anonymous companions. Why would these friends of Gilgamesh be not given a name or a personality? Well, it turns out that this theme of groups of 50 without individual attributes is very common throughout the mythology of pre-Sumerian times. And it just so happens that the planet of the Nommos takes 50 years to orbit its sun Sirius C. And that is what I have in my notes, but I don't think that's right. My apologies. I believe it's Sirius B that takes 50 years to orbit Sirius A. And so not to beat a dead horse here, but you guessed it, the Dogon knew about this 50-year orbit long before we confirmed it. And by the way, I hesitate to say confirmed it. Again, end of the video. Another bit of mythology worth noting is that the personification of Sirius A in Egypt was Isis, and it was said that Isis had an invisible sister, reminding us again of Sirius B. And in my notes it says add section about Osiris. Which one was? I guess I could go through the book again and figure out which one Osiris was, but you guys, let me know in the comments. But besides themes of 50s, fish peeps, and civilization jumpstarts, there is another reoccurring archetype that began with these amphibious beings and has held strong in all pre-recorded cultures, all the way to Göbekli Tepe, to the Anunnaki, and even on the other side of the world in Central America. A mystery that has had researchers of every trade stumped, asking the question, what's in the fucking bag? Because this thing was fucking everywhere, and there's just no obvious meaning behind it that we can find, but it was very important to all of these cultures, and it's everywhere. Like shown here in one of the oldest units that we have of Oannes, of which unfortunately we only have the bottom half. The depiction of the handbag had old Rob T quoting, the figure, whether intended to actually represent Oannes or a priest dressed up as Oannes, holds the usual mysterious hand basket, apparently made of reeds. No one knows what is in the basket, exclamation point. And I'll go ahead and have to fold the same way, because I got nothing on it either, as I have wondered about these man bags for years, ever since reading Hancock. And honestly, if anyone here has a hunch about this problem, hook it up, because like you've all seen, sometimes your comments turn into entire videos here. But I can't stress enough that if we had an idea about what these bags were, it would connect dots that we don't even know are dots yet. By now, a lot of you might be wondering about the obvious spelling similarity between Dogon and Dagon, and your curiosity is certainly justified. Having the same hunch, I looked and I found that Oannes, as mentioned above, was considered a semi-daemon, that is, existing in a state centered between the physical and the astral. Dagon is a Philistinian word for Oannes. This is special because for the connection of the words Dogon and Dagon to happen, they would have had to go through the being itself, the one named Oannes. And that notion rids us of any possibility of a group of people just picking up the vocab of a higher society. They would have had to also have made contact with this being or type of being to pick up this phonetic similarity. This theme continues on in other mythologies, including Greek myth, which says, we can go ahead and skip Greek myth. Well, actually, no, I think it's worth bringing up so that we can take a look at the misconceptions here. Because in Greek mythology, we have Orthros hooking up with his mother, Echidna. And this is a prime example of Greeks turning something Egyptian into something that's just weird. It is a copy of Horus succeeding his father Osiris to join up with Isis, which are, as we have seen, personified stars. So this is about sages becoming one with the stars and not some weird Freudian Maury Povich bullshit. But anyway, the Chinese have maintained that their civilization was jump-started by an amphibious being named Fuxi. And believe it or not, this fish-tailed motherfucker is credited with being the author of the Chinese Book of Changes. That's right, the I Ching. And I'll put that under the long list of shit I didn't know until going to the books as opposed to the internet. And this is no secret because in the appendix of the I Ching, the part we all skip, it reads clear as day, anciently, when Fuxi had come to the rule of all under heaven, he looked up and contemplated the forms exhibiting in the sky, and he looked down contemplating the processes taking place on earth. He contemplated the patterns of the birds and beasts and the properties of the various habitats. In his body, he found things for consideration, and the same at a distance in events in general. As within, so without. Thus he devised the 8 triagrams in order to enter into relations with the virtues of bright spirits and to classify the relations of the 10,000 things. It should be noted that in Chinese culture, the 10,000 things basically means everything, all things, in the same way as the 480 ass loads of the Dogon meant either all things or just all kinds of shit. A lot, basically. A plethora, if you will. But that is not nearly the end of these kinds of beings appearing in Eastern civilizations. But for the rest of that list, I'll have to refer you to a playlist on our channel here entitled simply Zen. This is the Zen playlist. While reading about the mythology of fish people jump-starting and warning mankind, I found this little bit that is so ridiculous that I guarantee you haven't seen it online because it's downright silly and funny. I laughed for like 20 minutes after reading this until I realized the reason that it is so ridiculous. But in Sumerian tablets, there is a section where Enki is determined to save mankind from a great flood. So he runs up to the reed hut of Zrusudra. And an older archetype for Noah, and begins shouting at his hut. In the bizarre fashion, speaking through the wall of Zrasudra's reed hut, Enki proclaimed, "Reed hut, wall of the reed hut, wall of the hut. Listen, O reed hut. Consider, O wall of the hut. O man of Sharupak, tear down your huts of reeds, build them of a reed boat, abandon things, seek life, give up possessions, keep your soul alive, and into the boat take the seed of all living creatures." So, very, very strange, but through text, this is just weird. But if you continue on in the tablets, it is made clear by the humans taking this account that they recognize a sensation of nostalgia coming from this particular Nommos. By repeating the term reed hut, he was, in his own alien way, very excited to see humans mimicking the very origins of his species, who took on the same type of homes on their own planet, many thousands or millions of years ago. As reed huts are a perfect private sanctuary for any swamp-dwelling creature. This being identified personally with the reed hut and saw that their teachings were in fact taking hold on this new planet, where perhaps the same teachings might have fallen flat on other civilizations, and despite being excited about this, knew that it was all about to be wiped out in a flood because of some kind of war in heaven that may or may not connect to the Mars thing and the Anunnaki. Within the same tablets, it is also mentioned that the Nommos breathed through their clavicles, which is right below the collarbone. So it seems that these guys would have often been doing the backstroke like we see otters do today. And if you were one of these creatures, you might see human beings as repulsive. Our bony limbs and pungent smells that aren't washed by the sea, the rough hair, and not to mention the fact that the bottom half of a human seems to split in order to walk across dry land. And it certainly seems that vice versa, when we see something that we don't understand, it gets very uncomfortable for both for both parties. Robert Temple had this to say about the fact that everything we are skeptical about eventually becomes self-evident. In the past few years, I have learned of increasing numbers of planets discovered by astronomers in other solar systems. Those astronomers who, by nature of their psychological dispositions, are determined to be skeptical, and they're used to take refuge in saying, other solar systems don't have planets. How well I remember that. Most sensible people always thought that such sentiments were crackpot, and now it has been proved. So then the argument shifted to, there may be other planets on other stars, but they don't have any life. That too has been called into question by what we already know about Mars. So once again, the argument can be expected to shift. There may be life, but it can't be intelligent, and so on. People who are determined to have negative thoughts can always find new ones. I have mentioned the planet Mars in passing. Do I believe that there was intelligent life on Mars at one time? I would not be surprised at a Martian connection with the Sirius mystery, as I have thought for some years. He also mentions the shock involved in seeing these creatures firsthand, like mentioned in our intro today about the British Mother. He writes, Burosis, according to the close account of Apollodorus, calls the amphibians by the collective name of the Anidati. They are described as being semi-daemons and not as gods. I suddenly wondered what the word anidotus, which is never translated in the Kori translations of the fragments of Burosis, could actually mean. Musaurus and Oannes being synonymous. He continues, so I turned to the lexicon to find the meaning of these words. I assumed that Corey would have translated them into English if they had simple, obvious meanings, but to my surprise, I found that their meanings were quite simple and specific. A musaurus is an abomination, and an anidotus is, quote, a repulsive one. Now, the reader might appreciate why we added the allegory at the beginning, which I rephrased, of course, for our intro. For the creatures credited with founding civilization in the Middle East were frankly described by the Babylonians who revered them and built huge statues of them as being repulsive abominations. If ever anything argued the authenticity of their account, it was this Babylonian tradition that the amphibians, to whom they owed everything, were disgusting, horrible, and loathsome to look upon. A more normal course for any invented tradition of the origins of civilization would have been to glorify the splendid gods or heroes who founded it. But instead, we find the specific descriptions of animals endowed with reason. The problem of revulsion is a difficult one. It seems to be partly a result of what we are taught when we are young. No doubt psychologists would have a great deal more to say about it, but whatever origins it may have, it seems to be almost uncontrollable once the propensity to it has developed. If someone finds snakes or spiders repulsive, it would take a great deal of persuasion to get him to change his attitude, and hypnosis is generally required to overcome a genuine phobia. Basically, when us humans create gods, we make them glorious. And even though the Nommos were not considered gods, but like Enki was, for example, in Anunnaki times, Sumerian times, not Anunnaki times. If something is made up, it's made to be glorious, but our founders happen to be hideous to the eyes of the Babylonians. A bit of a conundrum there. So when I was in the middle of diving into this mystery, I felt the urge to conduct a little bit of an experiment. We all know that children tend to tell the truth because, for lack of a better description, they don't know any better. As you guys have heard me describe them before, children are just people who are not ruined yet. I should put that on a t-shirt. But I told the basics of this Dogon story to 5 adults, each of which had similar reactions, saying that the knowledge of the Dogon can't be refuted, but the way that they learned it is just too much to be possible. But between my son and the younger kids, to my good friend Mike, I told the same tale, and to my amazement, they all had similar responses that were similar to each other, but the opposite of that of the adults. They responded like, well, of course, we got this stuff from somewhere because everything comes from something. And you can't argue with that logic. I mean, there we call it logic, that might be instinct, With children they're closer to source. We've been quite distracted since then. But the children that I told this mystery to had no issue acknowledging that there is something greater than themselves, because after all, as children, they are already under that impression. But every adult I spoke with outside of this community had an almost hidden repulsion to that very idea. And it seems to come back to that same hypothesis that we gained in our video Gnostic Lore Part 2, which can be summarized with the belief, if I'm not the top of the food chain, I don't like it here. We will use our ego to reject anything that compromises our position at the apex of this triangle or pyramid hierarchy. And we never dare admit it being second best. Oftentimes, when exploring these factually backed up ideas, we are told to grow up. The old adage, stop believing in fairy tales. Well, truth, every 10 years, always without cease, turns out to be stranger than fiction. Perhaps it's not up to us to grow up, but instead up to them to grow down. After all, it was Jesus who said, to enter heaven, you will have to be like children.
So you're sitting on your couch when everything in your room comes to life and declares loudly, let's send this one up. You start to panic a bit despite knowing that it's okay because, well, this is weird. But your panic quickly changes to absolute astonishment when the roof of your living room is ripped right off the top of your house, and what is there glaring at you now is a massive creature that is so beyond words and description that you are completely convinced that this is really happening. This being would be absolutely terrifying if it wasn't for its sweet telepathic accent encouraging you to remain calm because, as it says, like music, we have a lot of work to do. This thing sends down beams of lit up yet somehow organic tubes of material that pulls you out of this entire world. Your skin produces a black liquid from its pores and collects into two stones that are swatted off by this being's many helpers. He says to you, before you come up here, you will have to lose those, but you have no idea what it is that you just shed. You are now disembodied and in a place that cannot be put into human words, but if you had to utter a description, you might say UFO. The walls are moving with powerful shapes and designs and are also just as alive as everything else. Next, you can't tell if this is a window or a screen, but you are now viewing earthly life from outside of the hard drive that it's programmed on. It could show you anything, but instead it shows you a vision of yourself laying in the snow building the bottom portion of a greenhouse. The being can feel and hear everything going on within you watching this scene, and it says, "What you are doing here is good, but why are you doing it frantically? You have no choice but to be honest and admit things to this creature that you would never say to other people, saying, I am afraid that if I don't outwork all others, I will suffer financially, and I am deathly afraid of letting my family down." The being sees your sincerity and willingness to cooperate and rips a giant hole in this new reality that leads you into yet another one. And I mean, what the f***? It leaves you there so it can go do more work for other humans when out of the complete white surrounding, or I should say lack thereof, 3 beings emerge that are even more ineffable than the first. The first one was startling, but these new guys are impossible to even look at. In fact, they have to shape themselves down to something like hands for you to even comprehend. You feel like an insect floating in front of creator gods of a proportion that your personal mind could have never even fathomed. They start moving blocks that light up in differing ways as they are moved and aligned, and urgently ask you, "Do you understand? Do you understand?" Well, no, I don't. Telepathically is not even the right word, but you can feel them say, "That's okay, you will." But it needs to be sooner than later. We are all depending on your species. When you arrive gently back into your body, one might say that you have woken up now that your eyes are open again. But you know that by coming back, it is more like going back to sleep, because the world you just experienced had spatial dimensions that you can no longer imagine. Distance and time did not exist over there. Those limitations occur only in this thin skin of reality, and you don't know why. But you see a clock and you realize it has only been 10 minutes. You write down everything that you can about this experience, but pencil on paper is possibly the most futile way of capturing a concept of a world without concepts. A world that surrounds us all of the time, but we are blind to. A world brought to you courtesy of DMT. Chemists, neurologists, and all other scientific trades which concern it across the board have one thing in common concerning DMT. They have no idea what it is, its function, and why it does what it does. You've seen a million videos concerning the mysteries of DMT, and I don't want to repeat those, but there are a couple things that we have to cover before jumping into our hypothesis. Descartes was the first philosopher to call the pineal gland the seat of the soul. He was certainly onto something, but didn't quite have the scientific terminology yet. And the same goes for ancient mythology and religion, but we will tie back into that later. Scientific studies on rats have shown that the pineal gland is responsible for melatonin, serotonin, and dimethyltryptamine, the last of which, as mentioned above, is a complete mystery to mankind. It has been found in cerebral spinal fluid, and scientists have actually cloned the human gene that makes the enzymes that are the catalyst in DMT synthesis within the body. It has also been shown in rats that dimethyltryptamine is released from the pineal gland into the bloodstream upon the occasion of death. This has caused skeptics to believe that near-death experiences, or so-called life flashing before one's eyes, to be random neurons firing off due to hallucinations. However, if you caught the last couple of videos, we all know better than that. After all, just like we have to ask ourselves what the placebo effect is instead of using it as an umbrella explanation for mind over matter, we have to ask ourselves what is a hallucination. There are indeed certain things that material science cannot measure and weigh. Outside of the scientific community, however, DMT has been described by many as a gateway between the physical world and the spiritual worlds. This notion is only argued by people who have not dipped their feet in those waters, because surely if you have partaken, this notion is completely clear. In fact,
it seems to take you to a reality that is more real than real. Imagine waking up from a dream that was very vivid, but now that you're awake in this reality, you can look at your hands and say, okay, that was a dream, and now this is reality. But then think of doing that a second time. That is, out of this reality and into a clearer one. That is kind of what we mean when we say more real than real. We know that this chemical, DMT, is extremely important as it exists in almost every plant and animal. So every living thing, basically. This is why we really can't call it a drug. The cubensis mushroom yields a drug called psilocybin, and the cactus peyote yields a drug called mescaline. THC comes from cannabis, and so on. Basically, each plant has a specific active ingredient. This is clearly not the case with DMT, as you are currently holding it within your lungs, liver, pineal gland, and cerebral spinal fluid right now. So are all of the plants in your house. There's some dudes watching this right now like, I don't have any plants in my house. But the one plant that has the highest concentration of DMT, the acacia strain, is mentioned in mythology and religions worldwide since time recorded. The Ark of the Covenant was made of acacia wood. Moses spoke to the acacia bush that was burning. Now, the Sufis seem to argue that the bush of Moses was actually Syrian rue. This is absolutely fascinating to me. And some of you might already know where I'm going with this, but when you combine the DMT from acacia and the amino acid inhibitors of Syrian rue, you get digestible DMT. Kind of like ayahuasca. So the irony there is fun. Two differing spiritual sects that claimed the bush was this or that, but if they stopped arguing and came together, blam! Portal to the divine, bitches. But yeah, acacia is everywhere, even in Masonic rites. For example, the allegorical murdered body of Hiram Abiff, who built Solomon's temple, which would have to be its own video, was said to be resurrected from his resting place beneath an acacia sprig. In the Egyptian Masonic rites, the acacia is referred to as being the first matter, and through alchemical transmutation can produce a stone, if you kind of see where I'm pointing at. Then there are the countless ancient alchemical manuscripts that mention acacia and its divine essence. This list goes on, but I digress, as I just wanted to bring your attention to how important this plant is in all world religions and sects. But keep this in mind for later. But we have to remember that religion, well, I should say spirituality, is not a one-size-fits-all, as it is personal to you, just as we have discussed with symbology. An organism exists because it gathers information from its environment and adapts to it, thus moving up and forward in its adaptation process. Behind this process is a code of reality that is hidden from our five senses. Certain obvious and self-evident things like these are often ignored by science, as they cannot study them in a material way. And of course, in the case of DMT, we have heavy corruption, being that it has become the most illegal substance on Earth for absolutely no reason, or for a reason that we'll talk about. So yeah, there's just no funding to study it anymore. But as the brain evolves, so does the world that it generates. Hallucinogens, especially DMT, modify the information that the organism takes in and creates, showing them a reality that is seemingly alien. But these realities are not less real than our normal limited biological waking state. In fact, they might be a simple case of picking up more information than we normally could. This makes it very interesting when we consider the prior fact that DMT seems to release as the body dies. Under the influence of DMT, it is unignorable that it seems to be some kind of near-death experience, and even kind of feels like dying. And then we encounter creatures that are sometimes just as surprised that we can see them as we are to see them. The usage of DMT in ancient cultures is obvious by now, but we have to remember that these cultures would personify these encounters to help communicate the message that came to them to the masses. An example we are familiar with would be the concept of mathematics, language, and wisdom being personified by an archetype such as Thoth. But what about the personification that we see in figures in all world religions that greet us post-death? Figures like Saint Peter in Christianity. He stands at the gate between this world and heaven to meet up with you and go through a sort of book of life to see how you did. Anubis in Egyptian culture is quick to weigh your heart against the feather, and this again seems to be a way to grade your readiness to level up. There are many other cultures that have figures just like these two for their own particular post-death philosophies and theologies, but these are the most well-known to us, so let's run with them for now. The parallels between the personification of these two figures is obvious. It seems to be kind of a post-death vibe check. I mean, it's almost obviously clear that they are describing the same figure or being. This to me is beyond coincidence. Now, I realize that what Peter is doing seems to be a form of judgment, unlike Anubis and his form of vibe check. But we have to remember that the corruption of the Orthodox Church has oftentimes pushed this concept of judgment into the scriptures in order to help themselves in controlling the masses. We have to remember that the church used to make the laws, and our modern scriptures reflect that. But what does this have to do with DMT? Well, obviously, death is the key element here between the two subjects, but let's talk about that so-called vibe check. Anyone who has done DMT will tell you that the beings that they encounter seem to know them personally and have a grasp of what they have done with their life, thus making them able to give advice that is sometimes mind-blowing and life-changing, while sometimes encounters with these entities are abrupt, as they will be greeted with a rejection saying that you're just not ready yet. There are also many cases where the person partaking in this sacred act is measured and studied by the ineffable beings to help these entities understand the person's level of vibration. So, speaking of these entities being ineffable, undescribable that is, if you were to try to teach this experience to masses of people, you would have to use a metaphor for these entities. This is where the ancient art of personification comes into play. Every culture always colors the ineffable parts of life with particular personalities of their own understanding. The Christians seem to gravitate towards wise old men with white beards. Thus we got Saint Peter. The Egyptians had what we call therianthropes, or hybrid creatures, in order to personify what can't be spoken. So the human-formed man that is Saint Peter and the bird-headed figure that is Anubis is not literally what these beings look like. They are formless, they are spirit, they are ineffable. They can't be described, so we give out a little title and a category. Otherwise, our words fall on deaf ears. So there is no need for our ancient ancestors to have needed scientific jargon of chemical compounds like dimethyltryptamine, although it was obviously very important to them and every other culture. They would have had to personify or turn into allegory anything that we describe as scientific. Yet I have not been able to find what personification was used for DMT, despite knowing that it was a cornerstone of many cultures and theologies. But wait a second. The ineffable beings, the near-death experience parallels, the life flashing before your eyes, the post-death vibe check, the studying of a person's life in order to level up, and most importantly, the concept of being at the gateway between the physical world and the above spiritual worlds, etc. Every single one of these things can describe both DMT and the figures of Saint Peter and Anubis. What if we have been overlooking these conclusions and connections for centuries? What if Saint Peter and Anubis and the other post-death entities are the personification of DMT? So dimethyltryptamine is not just a modulator of reality, but literally seems to change your vibration in an obvious way. The way that you see the world after experiencing DMT is something that you
just don't come back from. It is a complete game changer. Well, if done correctly. There seems to be a modulation of how we see the world, and that modulation is permanent, much like a near-death experience. The astonishment that comes with seeing a completely different reality than we are used to might wear off over time, but the disclosure of knowing that those worlds exist is something that we can never forget. This is quite literally gnosis, as we have seen it with our own eyes, or I should say, with our inner eye. And there is just no scientific jargon that can explain it away for anyone who has had this experience. The phrase comes to mind, an oldie but a golden one, I know what I saw. Science has dismissed theology for as long as we have been alive. But once upon a time, science and religion used to be one. We are more than ever in desperate need of that reconnection of material science to the self-evident worlds of the mind and the modulators that seem to create our reality that is projected from our very sentience. If you ask me, there can be no clearer evidence than that which comes with DMT. And that to me makes it obvious as to why it has become so illegal. DMT makes it absolutely known to the user that heaven exists, and it cannot be argued by anyone who has not partaken in this sacred act. Of course, the government would shut something like that down. Many of you are aware of the risks that come with being caught with DMT. You are literally better off to be caught with 100 pounds of crack and an arsenal of weaponry than this so-called spirit molecule, which is the most abundant of its kind in nature. The irony is staggering. The one thing that could connect our society to a higher purpose is now the most scheduled one and punishable molecule on Earth, and its abundance is unavoidable. This is literally like making consciousness illegal. One of the most ancient stories of mythology that we have covered on this channel is that shortly after creation, God would hide the secrets of the universe deep within the center of man's mind, or according to different translations, within their souls. That way, only those who are worthy can find it. We are reminded of how Descartes described the center of the mind being the pineal gland to be where the soul resides. That being said, it is no secret that DMT experiences do not have to be accessed through the usage of synthesized chemicals. We can, much like the shamans, access it directly from our own source. After all, it is an entheogen. Knowing this could help us answer the question, where do shamans actually travel when they go into the upper worlds and have communion with spirits? Who are these entities who give the shamanic healers advice on how to address particular problems and how to heal the sick of their ailments with no medical degree? What is the source of this otherworldly information, and how can this information bypass the five senses and enter our minds unobstructed? If I had time, I would go through the myriad list of proven supernatural powers of entheogens like DMT through ayahuasca and the studies of Rick Strassman, but you can read about those yourself. I actually don't have the main, if you want Rick Strassman's take on it, there's that. Basically, shamans the world over have proven their capabilities to bring information from the above down to the physical realm in order to conduct miracles. Even though these obvious findings are ignored by science, we have well documented them in independent studies. However, there are a million YouTube videos and books that cover all of that. And like I said before, I don't like to repeat the echo chamber that the internet has already become. But DMT has been a cornerstone of our human history, and it is by every definition miraculous. And there is that word right there, miracle. A word that is a key in the description of angels and the above worlds coming down into this one. Could it be that they would need a sort of chemical gateway in order to bypass the thick physical membrane that traps us within this black cube? We cannot enter a video game without a modulation of the coding. A scientist cannot study a bacteria in a petri dish without a modulation of the cell. And it seems that we cannot access these higher realms without the cornerstone being a part of our DNA, sort of unlocking it as if it were
to also a code. So what if it works both ways? What if DMT, whether it be synthesized or already within us as an entheogen, is the key that these entities need to come in to modulate our reality for reasons that we can only speculate? In my recent conversation with Jade Lore of Compounding Infinity, she made it clear that alien beings would find this world to be quite a trip, or a hallucination, so to speak, as much as it would be the other way around, which whenever we go there, it's a completely alien world. So in that case, it seems as if there would be some kind of modulation to the code sent down to us using this tool that is already a key compound in our DNA, the essential building blocks of our essence and of our being. A lot of you are big fans of Terence McKenna, as am I. And he's known for introducing the stoned ape theory, in which human consciousness might have been catapulted into its current state by the usage of DMT and other hallucinogens. These ancient ancestors, being the same as us, surely would have encountered the same beings that we do today. And if you need proof of that, just take a look at the cave paintings or religious portraits all over the world. It is almost as if we were taught to take the path that we have due to a higher source through this chemical gateway, as opposed to directly from a so-called hallucinogen. By imitating the visions and sounds that were encountered during these altered states, a birthing process could very well have taken place that resulted in both art and language. And this goes without saying the obvious scientific fact that these entheogens are extremely neuroregenerative to the physical brain. So there would be a bit of a compounding or a snowball effect that would take place during these sessions of communion. But how does this chemical actually go about influencing our physiology? Let's break this down. What we call drugs attach to targeted cells called receptors. These are proteins that have been designed, so to speak, by nature to receive chemically modulated information from both external hallucinogens and internal entheogens. These receptors are targeted by the drug to provide a kind of vector for new information to transfer communication between adjacent synapses in the brain. This is done through electricity, and when the current reaches the end of a neuron, it releases pockets of neurotransmitters that were previously synthesized. Okay, that was a mouthful. But what that really means is that we are literally designed, created to receive these so-called drugs. Our bodies and minds are already pre-tuned to accept these messages. It is in our DNA to experience the divine. To ignore this is futile, and to make it illegal is just ignorant. Not ignorant, by the way, ignorant. Cannabinoids, for example. You might know that there are receivers in our brains designed specifically to receive weed. So, I mean, there you have it. We are made for this, and then we rejected this essential part of ourselves for the profiteering of a small group of small-dicked men. An essential book, but kind of overlooked on this subject, is Inner Paths to Outer Space. And pick this shit up if you want. I want to read my favorite paragraph from this solid unit here. Another unique feature of DMT is its active transport into the brain across the blood-brain barrier. Cells that are tightly glued together line the brain's blood vessels, preventing movement of most blood-borne chemicals into the brain's confines. Yet the brain sometimes expends energy to acquire some crucial molecules. I said modulators so many damn times that I said, crucial molecules via active transport across the blood-brain barrier. Examples of such molecules are glucose, the brain's fuel source, which is glucose, and certain amino acids that the brain is unable to synthesize on its own. DMT is one of these select compounds. Though why the brain expends energy to bring DMT into its confines remains a mystery. It is tempting to to postulate, however, that just as glucose is necessary for the brain's function, in some mysterious way, so is DMT. Whoa. So dimethyltryptamine is weird, even outside of this kind of study and usage. The connections seem to get personal. For example, after I showed a drawing of mine on our previous video, the Nine and the Primordial Question, I read a comment that was from a woman in Norway that drew these exact same symbols and has begun to kind of decode them as they seem to be some kind of cosmic message that activates dormant DNA, according to this particular member of our community. And there might be more on that later, because after reading her comment, we spoke and she was clearly smart as fuck, and even hesitant to drop this information anywhere else except for within our group here. But the reason that this video even exists today is because of a comment I read from a woman named Sarah. The comment was something along the lines of DMT is Saint Peter and Anubis, and I am onto it, or something like that. I should have screenshot it when I saw it, but now I realize that I get comments like this all the time, but every once in a while, reading one will strike a chord within me. And even without all of this prior evidence that we just talked about above, it was like a little spark of truth ignited with me just reading that small sentence in the comment. I had no idea it would become a full-ass video like this one, but I clicked on her name and asked her what she meant. This led to another video call like the one in Norway where she laid it all out, and a few of the details in this video are actually hers. And when I went through the old library over there to kind of sort of debunk it, but also kind of investigate it, I absolutely couldn't debunk it. In fact, everything that she had thought up on her own completely checked out in every book that I had notes in, leading me to read up more on post-death entities and the science of DMT. I just never made the connection, and I don't think I ever would have. And connections like this one are kind of my thing. But well, frankly, looks like it is also kind of your thing too. And this is amazing to me. What I mean is that there's a million videos and books on DMT and a million videos and books on post-death happenings and so on. But these connections, whether they are right or wrong, only happen when the two come together. That is to say, when we come together. We mentioned earlier that the Christians say that the bush of Moses was an acacia, and the Sufi say that it was Syrian rue. And it makes me wonder if either group ever realized that when the two of those come together, it solves a gigantic mystery. But as we have seen in the world, everybody likes to stay segregated to their own group and their personal belief systems instead of entertaining the ideas of others that would fill in the holes and gaps of their own philosophies. For whatever reason, this community that we have here today has evolved past that by leaps and bounds. In the comments, I am always reading people agreeing to disagree and sometimes combining information to come up with brand new philosophies like this one, all without the heinous arguing. I mean, we really dodged the internet bullet on this. Real truth emerges when we set our differences not aside, but instead together, and combining them to find out that we've all got the same thing kind of going. But when two adjacent philosophies come together, a clearer objective picture emerges. So damn, I mean, keep them coming. And let's keep this going.
Clean with the waters of death, where shallow ain't so sweet, but you don't have to swim right now.
So there's a particular type of occurrence that is more frequent than we are told. In fact, never mentioned about in the news or in school for that matter. Seldom spoken about is that there are mass sightings amongst children more often than you might think. especially in school zones. For whatever reason, mass sightings of unhuman entities happen with children far more than with adults. It's been a phenomenon all over the world since we began recording history. One of the more recent occurrences, and the biggest one we can speak of, is in Zimbabwe. In 1994, there were 62 school kids outside playing at recess. These children were between the ages of 5 years old to 12 years old. We should keep in mind that the Zimbabwe school that we're speaking of is in a modernized zone with a vast cultural array of students of all different backgrounds from all over the world. The laughing and the playing of recess that day quickly became an ordeal when there was a bright flash in the sky that caught the attention of all 62 students and the teacher supervising. Speaking of which, by the way, one teacher, 62 students, holy shit, like, does she have her hands full? Are they paying her? Are they paying her enough? Nevertheless, it caught everybody's attention, caused them to look up into the sky, where every person in attendance, from 5-year-old child to 12-year-old children and the teacher, saw what they described as silver discs, about 4 of them, blinking in and out. They described it, it seems to us, digital the way they were moving. They said they would disappear and then pop up somewhere else, indicating either some kind of teleportation or some kind of speed that we can't imagine. And that's when one of them began to make an ascent. It started following electrical lines down the path towards some brush outside of the recess yard, causing the teacher in attendance to actually flee, something that we'll get to later, as he later apologized for. All of the children were absolutely enthralled, amazed, and by all means hypnotized by what they were looking at. They watched the unknown object ascend, but didn't necessarily land. It just kind of, I guess, stayed in place, motionless. The hypnosis that the children were feeling, not literal hypnosis, but just the awe that they were feeling, quickly turned to alarm whenever 3 beings, let me see here, when 2 beings approached them from the craft that had descended. They were described as being gray with black insect-type eyes, wearing some kind of thin suits. This is obviously very reminiscent of the Greys. What's important to remember about this testimony is that these kids in Zimbabwe at the time were not sci-fi privy. They didn't actually even mention the terms aliens or UFOs when they gave their accounts. It never occurred to them that these were spacecraft or anything like that. They just reported what they saw. In later years, one of the children is reported as saying, quote, "This thing, whatever it was beautiful. It had a circular-shaped bright light as its leader, and behind it were tails of light in beautiful colors, green, orange, and yellow. It moved slowly and looked as if it was just above the house. The amazing thing is that it moved absolutely silently." These gray beings approached the children and began to mimic them. Playfully is what the children had said. They would mock what the children were doing and the mannerisms, playfully engage with these kids. And before long, after some engagement, these beings began telepathically communicating with the children. Different visions of technology being used wrong, being weaponized, and basically advancements in culture falling into the wrong hands, and that they were concerned about it because everything was at stake if powerful technology is in the wrong hands. What's very striking about this is that each of the students who reported this message reported the same message. They reported visions of holocausts and nuclear weapons and visions of pollution. The visions they acquired from these beings varied, but they had one uniform message, and that was adults are fucking up and somebody needs to step up. The beings are reported to have just disappeared, and then the craft that they had supposedly vehicled there, which they never saw them come in or out of necessarily, but it rose up slowly and then bolted off at a speed which I'm sure you've seen these new, Pentagon videos and stuff where they're like breakneck speeds and
coroners and shit like that. G's that would just completely turn any human being to liquid if they were inside the vehicle. But the adults, the principals, the staff of the school heard the kids, and they didn't really think too much of it at first, because after all, the same thing you might be thinking whenever you hear the story at first is that they're kids, you know, and kids have an imagination. It's easy to disregard these testimonies. But then that's where the story takes a very strange turn. Over the course of the next couple days, the children began drawing and illustrating and writing down what they experienced, and each of the students... What's up, buddy?
Nothing. Keep talking.
Okay. That's when skepticism turned to alarm, when this story takes a very strange turn. Over the course of the next couple days, all 62 students, ages 5 to 12, began drawing, illustrating, and writing down what they encountered that day, and every single one of them paralleled. They all matched. They were all within a boundary of impossible comparison. When the adults and the staff of the school began these illustrations, they immediately dropped all their skepticism and became, in fact, quite infatuated with the situation. So much so that they called some of the most advanced psychologists from all over the world, particularly child psychologists, asked them to come to the school to interview the children. As the incident began to pick up traction in the press, the teacher who had fled, who didn't want to say anything about what she saw, ended up coming forward and actually giving a statement, an apology for having left the kids behind, in which case I think no harm, no foul. But damn. Maybe if she just needed an excuse to get away from 62 fucking kids. I mean, that seems viable to me. I would, if I was taking care of 62 kids and they were all running around screaming, just pissing me off every day, that's a perfect excuse to bail the fuck out, is when you see some nope, I quit. So what we need to realize about the kids drawing and illustrating the same thing is that in the case of mass hysteria or child imagination, accounts will actually vary from person to person in the cases of mass hysteria, and with imagination, of course, child to child, or vice versa with adults and children. Whenever something happens that is a hallucination or a form of panicked observation, the stories will differ. With these kids, they did not differ, and they were all of different ages and different ethnic backgrounds.
Dad, can you pause it real quick?
No.
Because I want to put the sound.
I'm not going to put that on, buddy, but you want to show them real quick?
No.
No, alright.
You're going to edit out this part, right?
Mm-hmm. The story takes another drastic turn, as you might imagine, when the psychologists from all over the world showed up to lend their expertise. They spoke with the children, and these psychologists, who really didn't know what to expect walking into this and were frankly as skeptical as anybody else would be, left making statements that they were completely sold on the story of these children. Not because the children were convincing, but also because it was actually deemed impossible for that amount of children in that age range to actually conspire and co-create a story and then stick to it. In fact, it would have been impossible for them all to have the same story in the first place, then to stick to it years later, never ceasing, statistically impossible. Also, the child psychologists who were seasoned in trauma amongst children and the ways children speak and behave detected no signs in any of the children of overactive imagination or just downright lying. It wasn't there. The evidence wasn't there for any form of hoax. And I mean, that's a light way to say it. Not only was there not any evidence of it being a hoax, but it would have been impossible. It would have been impossible for nothing to have happened. That amount of students in that age cannot corroborate in that way. So we're not saying here in the video, by the way, that this is aliens. We're not using terms like extraterrestrials or visitors or anything like that. But there's one right there, I guess. But we are saying that something did happen that day, and it was crucial, and it was important, and it is absolutely unbelievable, unprecedented. Okay, so yeah, don't do that.
I'm setting it back up.
Yeah, please. One of the top esteemed psychologists risked everything. He risked his entire career to investigate this subject. His name was Dr. John Mack, and he's actually responsible for a few, I think, like just critical books on the subject of just otherworldly occurrences in general. This book in particular doesn't necessarily blame any particular thing on aliens. It just is a great speculation on what could be going on that caused these strange occurrences to happen. Now, the most amazing and inspiring part of the story is that several of the kids within the attendance of the school that day are now today, they're adults now. And many of them are actually very successful members of the EPA, run environmental agencies, and etc. These kind of jobs they've taken on that either raise money for the environment or work against certain military complexes in order to maintain balance and peace. There are Nobel Peace Prize winners within this group and several other people who have done incredible work for humanity that were in the schoolyard that particular day. And the reason that they got into the fields that they got into, they claim is directly because of the telepathic matches.
I'm good.
You're good?
My arm got stuck in the dresser when I was trying to get the snake.
I got you.
I touched the snake.
Where am I? What's going on? Who am I? All right, there's an alien. What was I saying? Oh, the kids became great environmentalists. They used this to help the world. Whatever these things did, these beings, these non-human entities did, it worked. I mean, for what it was worth, you know? Which leads me to the speculation portion of this entire thing is, I want to know why this occurrence is not isolated. Things come from either from the ground, the ocean, the sky, the mountains, caves even throughout history. They contact groups of kids where they are safely accessible, in this case, a recess. They will contact them and give them messages like this. This is not a rare thing, which is fucking weird. That we don't, like, let's talk about this, you know? Why do they contact children? This is merely speculation. I can't throw a bolt of evidence on this theory, but what if they know that if they contact adults of Earth, that means weaponized conflict? Because that's the way they've seen it happen our entire history, assuming that they've been with us throughout our entire evolution, or maybe even intervened, which would be an entire video on its own. Let me know if you'd like to see one about that. How you doing? He's snaky. You wanna go get your snake? Oh, is it behind the dresser again? Don't kick the camera.
I was trying to be able to change it without anybody knowing.
Oh, to pop in with nobody knowing? Okay, I won't say nothing next time. Alright. But you gotta get in, you gotta get into the camera. You gotta like go like this. You gotta like.
No, I'm not. I don't want to be it. I want to change it without you changing it.
Oh, okay. I'm actually gonna put up a screen right here on the video. This won't be really seen. I'm just making room for it so I can kind of know where I'm at. Alright, so here's a quote from one of the children as an adult, what they experienced with the being itself, with the beings themselves. Quote, "All I can tell you is that two beings were hopping along beside us, and they were curious. They weren't touching the ground. They were almost like mimicking us. All of the sudden, they were in front of us. I described them as being about arm's reach, and we were frozen. Telepathic images started going across my face. Communication through the eyes. That's all I can really describe it as. It was just image after image after image. Those thoughts came from the man's eyes." And that's interesting that they're calling this being the man's eyes, because remember, in context, this is not a sci-fi privy culture. They don't have the terminology of aliens from outer space. We kind of project that onto the ordeal. One of the other girls standing beside me, she got more communication about the environment, and for me, Mine was more about the usage of technology. So that's obviously going to be coming from one of the students who became a successful environmentalist or an EPA agent or such. Whenever we hear about anything concerning something that reminds us of the Greys, we can't help but be reminded of the ant people in Hopi cultures, or in the Aboriginals of Australia, the oldest civilization on Earth that we know of, describe also insect-eyed gray people who interacted and mingled and experimented with human beings. In fact, in many cultures, they are responsible for having bred us in order to study the way that we perform in physical reality, because apparently something about their reality seems to be not so physical. It's almost as if they live on multiple dimensions. In fact, the Aboriginals of Australia give you a reason that they have large black insect eyes. The pupil is large because it sees on multiple levels of realities, because the light spectrum that it takes in is so much greater than we do. However, we could go down a rabbit hole on Greys, ancient cultures, and creation stories, and any of that, but I wanted to focus today on this particular incident and what it teaches us as a culture, as adults. Yeah. Talk about what? Oh, yeah. Okay, yeah, my son informs me that we should tell you that the aliens' heads were described as looking like balloons, and he'll demonstrate here what you went too fast, what he's talking about. Thank you for your input. You should draw. You should get a Sharpie and draw. You should draw alien eyes on this and bring it back. But what can we learn from this? Why are these beings making contact with children and not us awesome individuals? Or do they know that it means war? Do they know that it means fear and hysteria? Do they know that the children are taking over next, as these children have? And if that really is the case, if there's something or someone coming from, whether it be a different place in the universe or a different level of reality, or something that we can't even imagine or haven't even conceptualized at all, now that we know that there is something happening and we don't know what, why in this case and many others are we being ignored? Why are adults being ignored and school children and children all over the world contacted? I think it's a beautiful strategy. I think that they're playing the long game, whoever they are, whatever they are. They're playing the long game by sending this message to the next generation, and I applaud them for that. However, it leaves me more questions than answers, as a lot of this shit does. But nevertheless, feel free to Google this shit and comment or whatever about it. If I left out a detail, let me know. Or if you know of any other stories like this that should be reported on, hit me up and let me know. All right, see you guys later.
Well, not yet.
What? Not yet. What? Oh, okay. You gotta draw the thing on there. He's gonna draw the alien face.
I'm not good at drawing.
Yeah, well, you are, but you're scribbling. That's more of a scribble.
Yeah, because I have to fill it in.
Oh, okay. I like how you went vertical with the almond eyes there. All right, say bye, Emery.
All right, I'll say bye.
Bye, guys.
But adios, amigos.